Have you ever wondered what secrets can hide behind a life of faith? This young man grew up divided between two worlds. His mother taught him about God, while his father valued philosophy. Everything changed when a preacher arrived in his town and saw something special in him. What followed was a journey of betrayal, persecution, and a mystery that would change the course of history. Where are you watching this video from? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to discover this secret hidden for centuries, subscribe now and leave a like to receive more powerful stories like this one. The meeting took place in a private villa outside the city, a neutral setting chosen for its discretion. Timothy was shown to an atrium where three men waited: a senator known for his interest in Eastern philosophical traditions, a military commander with extensive provincial experience, and a younger official whose administrative responsibilities included religious oversight. Lydian was present as well, her position apparently that of trusted advisor rather than subordinate. Her slight nod to Timothy conveyed both warning and encouragement as he entered this delicate diplomatic space. The conversation that followed was unlike any Timothy had experienced, a frank exchange about the relationship between spiritual movements and imperial stability, between moral renewal and political order. The officials expressed genuine curiosity about the movement's rapid growth despite persecution, its ethical teachings, its internal organization. Timothy responded with equal candor, neither apologizing for their distinctive beliefs nor presenting them in unnecessarily provocative terms. He emphasized shared concerns for social harmony, ethical behavior, and human dignity, while acknowledging fundamental differences in ultimate loyalty. Our allegiance to transcendent truth doesn't make us less committed to human flourishing, he explained. Indeed, it grounds our commitment to justice, compassion, and community in something beyond temporary political arrangements. The senator, clearly the group's intellectual leader, leaned forward with evident interest. So you propose not opposition to imperial order, but a deeper foundation for the values that sustain civilization itself? Precisely, Timothy affirmed. We seek not to overthrow but to transform, not through political revolution, but through renewed hearts and minds. The conversation continued for hours, touching on practical matters of religious tolerance, theoretical questions of moral philosophy, and specific concerns about certain practices within the believing communities. Throughout, Timothy maintained his characteristic balance, firm on essential principles, flexible on cultural expressions, always seeking to build understanding across divided perspectives. As the meeting concluded, the senator made a surprising admission. Kelia spoke often of you in his final years, as someone who understood both imperial concerns and spiritual imperatives. I see now what he meant. You stand between worlds that rarely communicate meaningfully. Not by my own design, Timothy replied honestly. My divided heritage once seemed a burden. Now I recognize it as preparation for this very role. The younger official spoke for the first time, his expression thoughtful. Is such integration possible on a larger scale? Can a movement with transcendent claims coexist peacefully within political structures concerned with present order? Timothy considered the question carefully. It requires wisdom on both sides. From believers, recognition that civil order serves human flourishing. From authorities, understanding that ultimate loyalties cannot be commanded, only respected. The path is neither simple separation nor uncritical accommodation, but thoughtful engagement that honors legitimate concerns on both sides. The acknowledgement of complexity, rather than the promise of simple solutions, seemed to impress the officials more than any passionate rhetoric might have. As they parted, the senator offered a cautious commitment. We cannot promise freedom from all restriction, but we can advocate for policies that distinguish between genuine threats to public order and mere differences in ultimate belief. Your perspective today helps us understand that distinction more clearly. It was a modest achievement, but potentially significant for communities facing persecution across the empire. As Timothy departed with Lydian, he felt the weight of his unique position, representing transcendent claims to temporal powers, interpreting imperial concerns to spiritual communities, always standing at the intersection. You did well, Lydian, observed as their carriage returned to the city. Better than Chilius himself might have done, he could argue for tolerance on pragmatic grounds. You speak from authentic integration of multiple perspectives. It's the inheritance of my divided life, Timothy replied. What once seemed fragmentation has become capacity for bridge building. In the days that followed, Timothy visited the small community of believers in Rome, offering encouragement and guidance for their particular challenges. He visited Paul's tomb as well, a simple marker outside the city where his mentor's remains had been laid by faithful companions after his execution. Standing before that modest monument, Timothy reflected on the journey that had brought him from the divided house of his childhood to this moment. Paul's mentorship had been crucial, but equally important was the complex heritage Timothy had once attempted to escape: Greek and Jewish, rational and spiritual, imperial and prophetic. The divisions he had struggled to resolve had become precisely the foundation for his unique contribution. Timothy returned to Ephesus renewed in purpose, if not in physical strength. In the years that followed, he continued guiding communities facing increasingly diverse challenges, his letters providing both practical direction and deeper philosophical framework for believers navigating complex cultural landscapes. These letters, carefully preserved and widely circulated, became his enduring legacy. Not just their specific content, though that remained valuable, but the approach they embodied, the capacity to integrate multiple perspectives without losing essential focus, to honor diversity without surrendering unity, to engage temporal realities while maintaining transcendent loyalties. Timothy never married, his life devoted to the communities under his care, yet he was far from alone. The network of leaders he mentored, the companions who shared his journey, the unexpected allies like Lydian who valued his integrative perspective, all formed a kind of extended family, united not by blood, but by shared vision. As Timothy's health declined in later years, he focused increasingly on developing the next generation of leaders, not seeking to create copies of himself, but encouraging, each to recognize how their own unique positioning might serve the larger mission. "The greatest inheritance I can offer," he wrote in what would be his final letter to these younger leaders, "is not answers, but approach. Not certainty about every question, but capacity to maintain integrity amidst complexity. The challenges you face will differ from those I encountered. Your contexts will present new tensions between competing imperatives, yet the principle remains. Apparent division embraced rather than escaped becomes the foundation for unique contribution. I began this journey seeking to resolve the tensions of my divided heritage. I complete it, recognizing that these very tensions prepared me for my particular calling. Perhaps the same is true for you. Your struggles, your complex positioning between competing worlds, these are not obstacles to overcome, but preparation for your distinctive service. Stand, therefore, confidently at the intersections where you have been placed. See with multiple perspectives without losing focus on essential truth. Build bridges where others perceive only walls. This is the inheritance of integration that I pass to you, not as burden but as blessing." Timothy died peacefully in Ephesus, surrounded by those he had mentored and guided through decades of service. The community mourned deeply, yet celebrated. The legacy he left, not just in the communities he had shepherded or the letters he had written, but in the model of leadership he had embodied. A leadership that stood confidently at intersections. A perspective that integrated without homogenizing. A legacy that transformed apparent division into unique contribution. The inheritance of integration. In the dusty streets of Lystra, where the scent of spices mingled with the aroma of sacrificial offerings, young Timothy walked with eyes that absorbed everything. At 16, he was caught between worlds, the sacred teachings of Torah from his Jewish mother Eunice and grandmother Lois on one side, and the rational philosophies of his Greek father on the other. This division was more than mere geography. It was etched into his very soul. Timothy paused before the modest synagogue where his mother and grandmother spent their Sabbaths in prayer. He ran his fingers along the rough stone wall, feeling the weight of generations of faith beneath his touch. Behind him, On the other side of town stood the marketplace where his father conducted business. Surrounded by statues of gods Timothy had been taught not to worship. "Why must I choose?" he whispered to the setting sun. His slender frame cast a long shadow across the pathway, stretching toward the synagogue as if reaching for answers. At home, the evening meal was a microcosm of his divided world. His mother prepared traditional Jewish food with careful attention to ritual purity, while his father spoke of commerce and Greek philosophy. Tonight, the conversation had turned to the rumors spreading through Lystra. A traveling teacher had arrived, speaking of a Messiah who had fulfilled ancient prophecies. "These followers of the way are dangerous," his father warned, his merchants, hands gesturing emphatically. "They disrupt trade and challenge both the synagogue and the empire. Stay away from them, Timothy." Across the table, Eunice's eyes held a different light. "Listen to what they say before you judge," she said quietly. "The scriptures speak of one who would come. What if these messengers bring truth?" Timothy looked from one parent to the other, feeling the familiar strain of being pulled in opposite directions. His grandmother Lois, silent until now, placed her weathered hand over his. "Truth is seldom comfortable, child," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of years. "But it is always worth seeking." Later that night, Timothy climbed to the flat roof of their home. The stars above Lystra seemed to burn with unusual brightness, as if they too were waiting for something to happen. He traced the constellations his father had taught him, Greek patterns in a Jewish sky. "Who am I meant to be?" he asked the silent heavens. "Greek or Jew? Son of reason or child of faith?" The stars offered no answer, but in the quiet of that moment, Timothy felt a stirring within, a hunger for something that transcended the boundaries of his divided heritage. He didn't know it yet, but the arrival of the traveling preacher named Paul would soon shatter the carefully balanced world he had always known. The marketplace hummed with the familiar cacophony of commerce, merchants hawking their wares, animals braying in protest, children weaving through the crowd on urgent errands. Timothy helped his father catalogue imported fabrics, his hands moving mechanically while his mind wandered. Then a voice cut through the market's chaos, distinctive in its passion and authority. "The God who made the world and everything in it does not live in temples built by human hands." Timothy's head snapped up. Near the central fountain stood a man unlike any he had seen before. Small in stature but commanding in presence, the speaker's words seemed to pierce through the noise and superficiality of the marketplace. His dark beard was flecked with grey, and his eyes burned with conviction. "This unknown God you worship, I proclaim him to you." Timothy abandoned his duties and drew closer, pulled by an inexplicable force. The speaker, Paul was his name, according to the whispers around him, spoke not of rituals or philosophies, but of a living relationship with the Creator. He spoke of Jesus, a teacher from Galilee who had revealed God's love through his life and teachings. What struck Timothy most was how Paul bridged worlds. He quoted Greek poets one moment and Hebrew prophets the next. He spoke to the heart of both cultures without diminishing either. Here, finally, was someone who inhabited the same divided space as Timothy, yet seemed somehow whole. "The Messiah came not to condemn but to redeem," Paul continued, "not to separate people but to break down the dividing walls between them." A tremor ran through Timothy. Breaking down dividing walls. The words resonated in the deepest chambers of his heart. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some sneered and walked away, others shouted challenges. A few listened intently. Timothy's father appeared at his shoulder, tugging him back toward their stall. "This is foolishness," his father hissed. "Come away." But Timothy couldn't move. "He speaks to both worlds, father, Jewish truth in Greek understanding. He speaks dangerous half-truths that will only bring Rome's wrath upon us," his father replied. "These followers of the way are disrupting the empire. I forbid you from listening to him again." That evening, Timothy defied his father's command for the first time. He slipped out after dark to the home where Paul and his companions were staying. He hesitated at the doorway, gathering courage, when a voice behind him made him start. "You seek answers, young man." Timothy turned to find Paul himself standing in the shadows, studying him with eyes that seemed to perceive more than appearances. I don't know what I seek, Timothy admitted. Paul smiled. That is often how the journey begins. Come inside. We have much to discuss. Inside the humble dwelling, a small group of believers gathered. Timothy listened, transfixed, as Paul spoke more intimately than he had in the marketplace. He spoke of a God who transcended the divisions of Jew and Greek, of a love that could heal the fractures within a divided soul. When Timothy finally returned home in the pre-dawn hours, something fundamental had shifted. The stars above remained the same, but the young man gazing up at them had been irrevocably changed. 3 days passed. Timothy moved through his routines, like a sleepwalker, his mind constantly returning to Paul's words. Each night he secretly visited the house where the followers gathered, drinking in teachings that seemed to pour cool water on his parched spirit. On the 4th morning, Timothy's internal conflict reached its breaking point. His father had discovered his nocturnal visits and confronted him at breakfast. "You will stop this nonsense immediately," his father demanded, his merchant's voice accustomed to obedience. "These people are disturbing the peace of the empire. Association with them can only bring trouble to our family and our business. But, Father, if you would only listen to what they teach, I've heard enough blasphemy in the marketplace," his father cut in. "Choose now, Timothy. Your family and your future, or these wandering troublemakers who will be gone with tomorrow's wind." The ultimatum hung in the air like a blade. Timothy looked to his mother, whose eyes were downcast but whose hands trembled slightly. A silent communication, he understood. She and his grandmother had already recognized the truth in Paul's message. Timothy stood, his heart pounding. "I cannot divide myself anymore, Father. I must discover who I truly am, and I believe these teachings hold the answer." His father's face hardened. "Then you are no longer welcome under my roof. Gather your belongings and go." The words cut deeper than Timothy had imagined possible. He had expected anger, disappointment, but not this absolute severance. Eunice rose to protest, but Timothy's gentle hand on her shoulder stopped her. "It's all right, Mother. Perhaps this is necessary." In his small room, Timothy packed few possessions: a spare tunic, his mother's copy of Isaiah's prophecies, a small knife his father had given him on his 13th birthday. Each item seemed to weigh more than it should, laden with memories and implications. His grandmother Lois appeared at the doorway, her eyes glistening but resolute. "Your grandfather faced a similar choice in Alexandria many years ago," she said. "He chose safety and spent his life wondering what might have been. Don't carry that burden, Timothy." She pressed something into his palm, a small silver amulet, inscribed with Hebrew letters. "To remind you that you carry both worlds within you, neither must be abandoned completely." At the doorway of his childhood home, Timothy embraced his mother. "I will return," he promised. "I know," she replied, her faith evident even in those 2 simple words. "And you will not be the same. Go with God, my son." The morning sun cast long shadows as Timothy made his way to the house where Paul stayed. The apostle was preparing to leave Lystra, continuing his journey to spread his message throughout Asia Minor. Paul looked unsurprised to see Timothy standing there with his meager belongings. "You have made a choice," he observed. "I want to follow you," Timothy said, "to learn from you, to understand how to be whole instead of divided." Paul's weathered face broke into a smile that transformed his austere features. "The path is not easy, young Timothy. There will be hardships, rejection, even danger." "I understand." "Do you?" Paul's eyes searched his. "What we carry is not a comfortable message. It challenges people's deepest assumptions. Are you prepared to face that?" Timothy thought of his father's rejection, the first taste of what might lie ahead. "I don't know if I'm prepared," he admitted honestly, "but I know I must try." Paul nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Then welcome to our family. We depart at midday for Iconium." As they left Lystra behind, Timothy felt both the weight of what he was leaving and the lightness of possibility before him. The dust of his hometown clung to his sandals, a reminder that no matter how far he traveled, part of him would always belong to the divided house where his journey began. The road to Iconium stretched before them like a pale ribbon across the landscape. Timothy walked alongside Paul, Silas, and the other companions, his legs aching from the unaccustomed travel, but his spirit strangely buoyant. With each step away from Lystra, the tension of his divided existence seemed to ease, replaced by a singular purpose. "You're quiet, Timothy," Paul observed as they paused for water near a roadside spring. The older man's perceptiveness was unnerving, as if he could read the thoughts swirling beneath Timothy's silence. "I'm trying to understand," Timothy admitted. "Everything is happening so quickly." Paul nodded, his eyes crinkling with empathy. "The spirit often moves faster than our understanding." "Can follow. Tell me what troubles you." Timothy cupped his hands in the cool spring water, watching it spill through his fingers. "My whole life I've been caught between worlds, never fully Greek, never fully Jewish. I thought following you would resolve that division, yet I still feel—" He struggled for the right word. "Incomplete," Paul finished for him. "Yes." Paul sat beside him on a sun-warmed rock. "Listen carefully, Timothy. The message I carry is not about eliminating differences, but transcending them. You're Greek. Mind and Jewish heart are not accidents. They are gifts that allow you to build bridges others cannot. But how can I be authentic when I feel pulled in opposite directions? By understanding that wholeness doesn't mean uniformity," Paul replied. "It means integration. The day will come when what now feels like a burden will reveal itself as your greatest strength." They traveled for weeks, and Timothy observed how Paul operated in different environments. In synagogues, he reasoned from the scriptures with fellow Jews. In marketplaces, he engaged Greek philosophers on their own terms. Yet his core message remained consistent: the dividing walls between people and God, between people and each other, could be broken down through Christ's love. In Iconium, Timothy experienced his first taste of hostility. As Paul taught in the synagogue, certain religious leaders became incensed at his message of inclusion. Outside, they confronted the group with angry accusations. "You corrupt our sacred traditions," one elder shouted, his finger pointing accusingly at Paul. "You throw open the gates to uncircumcised Gentiles and call it God's will." Timothy flinched at the venom in the man's voice. This was no academic disagreement, but raw personal hatred. Paul, however, responded with remarkable calm. "The prophets themselves spoke of a time when God would call all nations to himself," he replied. Isaiah wrote, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples." The confrontation escalated until the city guard intervened, warning Paul and his companions to move on. That night, as they camped outside the city walls, Timothy struggled with his first doubts. "How do you maintain such calm in the face of rejection?" he asked Paul. The apostle was silent for a moment, gazing into the small cooking fire. "I was once the most zealous persecutor of the message I now proclaim," he finally said. "I understand their anger because I once embodied it. This gives me compassion rather than resentment." Timothy digested this surprising revelation. "You were a persecutor?" "The worst kind, one who believed he was serving God through his violence," Paul admitted. "Each face I see contorted in anger reminds me of the mercy I've received. How can I not extend the same to them?" This vulnerability transformed Timothy's perception of his mentor. Paul was not simply a confident teacher, but a transformed soul, someone who had experienced a profound reversal of identity. Perhaps, Timothy thought, his own divided heritage was not so insurmountable after all. The weeks became months. Timothy's soft hands grew calloused from travel, his skin weathered by sun and wind. His mind expanded with Paul's teachings, which were at once deeply rooted in Hebrew scripture and radically new. Most importantly, he witnessed the formation of communities that defied social boundaries, places where slaves and free citizens, men and women, Jews and Greeks, gathered as equals. One evening in Derbe, as the newly formed community of believers shared a meal together, Timothy found himself serving bread to a wealthy Roman merchant and a Jewish widow. Both thanked him with the same warm phrase, "Peace be with you, brother." Brother. The word resonated in his chest. For the first time in his life, Timothy belonged fully to something that transcended the categories that had always defined and divided him. Later that night, as stars shimmered above their campsite, Timothy took out his grandmother's amulet, tracing the Hebrew letters with his finger. He no longer felt it as a symbol of division, but as a reminder of the multiple traditions that had shaped him, traditions that he was now helping to bridge. Paul approached, noticing the amulet in Timothy's hand. "Your heritage," he said simply. Timothy nodded. "I'm beginning to see it differently now, not as two halves at war, but as complementary parts of a greater whole." Paul smiled, the firelight illuminating his weathered face. "Now you're beginning to understand. The journey ahead will test this insight, but never forget it. Your divided house has become the foundation for a unique mission." 6 months into his journey with Paul, Timothy had settled into the rhythm of their mission. They traveled from city to city, establishing communities of believers, teaching, encouraging, then moving on. Timothy's role had evolved from observer to participant, his facility with both Greek and Hebrew making him invaluable as a bridge between different groups. In Ephesus, a sprawling port city dominated by the magnificent Temple of Artemis, their mission faced its greatest challenge yet. The city thrived on commerce related to the goddess worship, and their message of one true God threatened powerful economic interests. The group took lodging near the Jewish quarter, in the home of a tent maker named Aquila and his wife Priscilla. After an exhausting day of teaching in the synagogue, Timothy was sent to purchase supplies in the marketplace. As he selected bread from a vendor, a voice whispered close to his ear, "Be careful who you trust, son of two worlds." Timothy spun around, but saw only the usual market crowd flowing around him. A chill ran down his spine despite the warm evening air. He hurried back to Aquila's house, troubled by the mysterious warning. That night a feast was prepared to welcome new believers, the courtyard filled with an eclectic mix of people, Jewish merchants, Greek scholars, Roman citizens, and humble laborers. Timothy marveled at the unlikely fellowship, still not entirely accustomed to such boundary-crossing communion. A newcomer arrived, introduced as Alexander, a coppersmith from Macedonia. There was something in his calculating gaze that made Timothy uneasy. During the meal, Alexander engaged Timothy in conversation that seemed innocent enough. "You are in a unique position, aren't you?" Alexander observed, swirling wine in his cup. "Not fully Greek, not fully Jewish, yet trusted by both. Paul teaches that in Christ, these distinctions lose their dividing power," Timothy replied carefully. Alexander's laugh held little warmth. "Noble sentiments, but tell me, have you never wondered about the contradictions in Paul's message? He preaches freedom from the law, yet enforces his own rules. He speaks of unity, yet creates division wherever he goes." Timothy frowned. "That's not true. The division exists already. Paul simply brings it to the surface." "Perhaps." Alexander shrugged. "Or perhaps there are aspects of his past and yours that would shed different light on this mission if they were known." Before Timothy could press him further, Alexander excused himself and melted into the gathering. The conversation left Timothy with a vague sense of unease that persisted into the following days. Strange incidents began to occur. Twice Timothy noticed the same hooded figure following their group through the city. A merchant who had welcomed them initially suddenly refused to sell them provisions. Most disturbing, Timothy found a cryptic message scratched into the dust outside their lodging, "Ask about Damascus." When Timothy finally shared his concerns with Paul, the apostle's reaction was unexpectedly severe. His face paled, and for a brief moment, Timothy glimpsed something like fear in his mentor's eyes. "Damascus," Paul murmured almost to himself. "Always it comes back to Damascus." "What happened in Damascus?" Timothy pressed. "Alexander hinted at secrets from your past and mysteriously mine as well." Paul's expression hardened. "We all have chapters in our lives we would rather leave unread, Timothy. Mine are between me and God. As for you," he hesitated, "your path is your own to discover." That night, unable to sleep, Timothy ventured into the small courtyard of their lodging. The moon cast silver light across the flagstones, and in its illumination, he saw a small scroll tucked beneath a potted olive tree. With trembling hands, he unrolled it to find a message written in careful Greek. Your father is not who you believe. Seek the truth at the archives of Lystra, where records of Rome's collaborators are kept. What you learn may change everything. Timothy's heart pounded painfully against his ribs. His father, the Greek merchant who had disowned him, harbored secrets. What could this possibly mean? And who would know such things? For 3 days, Timothy carried the scroll hidden in his tunic, torn between loyalty to Paul and the burning need to understand the cryptic message. His distraction became noticeable. Your mind is elsewhere, Paul observed, as they prepared scrolls for the next day's teaching. Since our conversation about Damascus, something has changed. Timothy hesitated, then produced the mysterious scroll. Someone is trying to drive a wedge between us, he admitted, but I can't deny that the questions have taken root. Paul studied the scroll, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Perhaps it's time for both of us to confront the shadows we've been avoiding. That evening, in the privacy of a small room lit by a single oil lamp, Paul revealed the full story of Damascus, how he had once been Saul, a zealous persecutor of believers, until a blinding light and divine voice had transformed his life and mission. He spoke of the blood on his hands, the communities he had helped destroy, the lives forever altered by his former crusade. I carry this knowledge every day, Paul concluded, his voice hoarse with emotion, not as a weight to crush me, but as a reminder of the transformative power of forgiveness. Timothy sat in stunned silence, absorbing the extent of Paul's former life. Rather than diminishing his respect for his mentor, the revelation deepened it. The courage to transform so completely, to face those he had once persecuted and ask forgiveness, this was a strength beyond anything Timothy had imagined. And what of the claims about my father? Timothy finally asked. Paul's expression grew troubled. I don't know, Timothy, but if you must seek these answers, do not go alone. There are forces at work here, beyond what you can see. I need to... No, Timothy said with quiet determination. Whatever the truth, I need to face it. Paul nodded slowly. Then we shall delay our departure from Ephesus. Some journeys cannot be postponed, even when danger shadows every step. As Timothy left the room, the oil lamp flickered, casting giant shadows across the wall. His own shadow seemed momentarily to take the shape of a man he didn't recognize, taller, more imposing, with the bearing of someone far different from the merchant's son he had always believed himself to be. The full moon illuminated the Ephesian streets as Timothy followed Priscilla through the winding alleys. She had offered to guide him to the provincial archives where records from Lystra might be stored. Are you certain you want to pursue this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Some truths once learned cannot be unlearned. I've lived my whole life between worlds, Timothy replied. I need to know the ground I stand on. Priscilla's expression softened with compassion. Just remember, whatever you discover, it doesn't change who you've chosen to become. The provincial archives were housed in a stone building near the governor's residence. A night clerk, persuaded by Priscilla's generous bribe, agreed to leave them alone with the records from Galatia province, which included Timothy's hometown of Lystra. 1 hour, the clerk whispered, then you must be gone. Timothy's hands trembled as he unrolled scroll after scroll, scanning for any mention of his father's name. The musty smell of papyrus filled his nostrils as the night crept forward. Just as despair began to set in, Priscilla motioned him over to a cabinet marked Imperial Security. These would be records of local collaborators, she explained, her voice tight with tension. People who assisted Rome in maintaining control of the provinces. A scroll labeled Lystra Confidential Informants caught Timothy's eye. He unrolled it carefully, his heart pounding as he scanned the list of names. Halfway down, he froze. There it was, his father's name, followed by a detailed account of services rendered to Rome, including information provided about subversive, religious elements. His father had been a spy for Rome, not just any spy, but one specifically tasked with reporting on religious groups that might threaten Roman authority, including, most likely, the early believers that Paul had come to reach. The revelation hit Timothy like a physical blow. The merchant who had raised him, who had taught him Greek philosophy and the value of rational thought, had been secretly working to undermine the very faith his mother and grandmother cherished. But there was more. A notation beside his father's name referred to another document. With increasingly unsteady hands, Timothy located the referenced scroll, which contained correspondence between his father and a high-ranking Roman official. The words swam before his eyes. The boy shows promise. His mixed heritage provides perfect cover. When he comes of age, consider him for recruitment to continue your work. Timothy staggered back, the scroll dropping from his nerveless fingers. They had planned to recruit him, to make him follow in his father's footsteps as an informant against believers. "Timothy," Priscilla's concerned voice seemed to come from very far away. "We need to leave," he managed to say, rolling the damning documents and tucking them into his tunic. "Now." They slipped out of the archives, just as voices approached, guards making their rounds. Back in the safety of the streets, Timothy leaned against a wall, struggling to process what he had discovered. "What did you find?" Priscilla asked gently. "My father," Timothy's voice broke. "He was an informant for Rome. He reported on religious dissidents, and He couldn't continue. Priscilla's face showed no surprise, only compassion. "Come. We need to tell Paul immediately." But when they returned to their lodgings, they found confusion and alarm. Silas met them at the door, his face grave. "Demas is gone," he reported. "And with him the collection for Jerusalem and several scrolls containing names of believers throughout Asia Minor." Demas, one of their trusted companions, had betrayed them. The timing couldn't be coincidence. "When?" Timothy demanded, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. "Shortly after you left," Silas replied. "He claimed to be following you to ensure your safety." The implications were clear. The mysterious messages, the warnings, the scroll directing him to the archives, all had been part of a plan to lure Timothy away, so Demas could carry out his betrayal. Paul joined them, his face lined with worry. "What did you discover, Timothy?" Timothy handed over the scrolls from the archives, watching as Paul's expression shifted from concern to shock to deep sadness as he read. "I suspected something like this," Paul finally said. "There were inconsistencies in your father's reaction to our teaching, a specific kind of hostility I've seen before in those with divided loyalties. Did you know?" Timothy's voice was barely audible. "All this time, did you know?" Paul met his gaze directly. "I suspected, but had no proof, and it was not my truth to reveal, even if I had known with certainty." Timothy turned away, overwhelmed by competing emotions, betrayal, anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a strange relief that finally he understood his father's vehement opposition to his new path. "What happens now?" he asked after a long silence. "Demas will have gone to the authorities," Silas said grimly. "We need to leave Ephesus immediately." "No," Paul countered, surprising them all. "Running confirms guilt. We've done nothing against Roman law. We'll continue our work openly, though with greater caution." Timothy's mind raced, connecting fragments of conversation, strange occurrences, subtle warnings. "Alexander the coppersmith," he said suddenly. "He was working with Demas, wasn't he? Trying to unsettle me, make me question you." Paul nodded grimly. "Divide and conquer, an old strategy. They hope to separate you from us, using your own past as the wedge." "But why?" Timothy pressed. "What makes me so important in this scheme?" Paul and Priscilla exchanged a glance that suggested they knew more than they were saying. Finally, Paul spoke carefully. "Your unique position, Greek and Jewish, educated in both traditions, makes you valuable to our mission. Perhaps others see that value too, but for different purposes." Timothy sensed there was more, but before he could press further, Aquila burst into the room. "Roman guards are searching houses in the Jewish quarter," he reported breathlessly. "They have a list of names. Yours is among them, Paul." Decisions had to be made quickly. Paul would go with Silas to a safe house outside the city. Priscilla and Aquila would maintain their visible presence to avoid arousing further suspicion. And Timothy would stay to continue their work more discreetly, using his status as a citizen of both worlds to move beneath notice. As they prepared to separate, Paul took Timothy aside. "The truth you discovered tonight is painful," he acknowledged, "but remember, our pasts inform our presents, but do not determine our futures. What your father was does not dictate what you must be." Timothy clutched the small amulet his grandmother had given him. "I feel more divided than ever," he admitted. "How can I trust my own judgment when I didn't even know the truth about my own family?" Paul's hand on his shoulder was steady and warm. "Because the truth, Timothy, is larger than our limited understanding of it. Your father's deception doesn't negate the genuine love he had for you, nor does it invalidate the worthy aspects of what he taught you." These words, spoken with such certainty, offered Timothy a foothold in his crumbling world. As they embraced in farewell, Timothy felt both the weight of his new knowledge and, paradoxically, a new kind of freedom. The hidden forces that had shaped his life were now exposed to light, painful as that light might be. That night, as Timothy lay alone in the small room that had been his home for weeks, he unrolled the damning scrolls once more. In the flickering lamplight, his father's name seemed to float above the papyrus, a name he had once spoken with respect, now forever altered in meaning. With deliberate movements, Timothy held the edge of the scroll to the lamp's flame. The papyrus caught quickly, orange fire consuming the record of betrayal. He watched until nothing remained but ashes, then scattered them out the window into the Ephesian night. The past could not be changed, but perhaps it could be released. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. Tonight, Timothy would allow himself this symbolic act of closure, not forgetting but choosing to move forward nonetheless. Dawn broke over Ephesus with a blood-red sky. Timothy watched the sunrise from the rooftop of Aquila's house, the events of the previous night, still churning in his mind. The betrayal of Demas, the revelation about his father, the hasty departure of Paul and Silas, all of it left him feeling unmoored, adrift between identities once again. "Troubled thoughts make poor companions for breakfast," Priscilla observed. Joining him with a small loaf of bread and olives, her practical kindness had become a steady anchor in the growing storm. "I burned the scrolls," Timothy confessed, accepting the food with gratitude. "Was that wrong?" "They were evidence." Priscilla considered this. "Evidence of what? Your father's choices? Those belong to him, not you. But if he was reporting on believers, if he was involved in persecutions, then that is between him and God," Priscilla said firmly. "Your path remains your own." The morning unfolded with a semblance of normalcy that felt surreal to Timothy. Believers still gathered discreetly for teaching. The work of copying scrolls continued. Messages arrived from Paul, who had established temporary quarters in a village to the north. 3 days passed. Timothy was returning from delivering letters to a house church when he noticed a figure following him, not attempting to hide, but maintaining a deliberate distance. Near a public fountain, Timothy stopped abruptly and turned. "If you wish to speak with me, do so directly," he called. The figure, an elderly man with a scholar's stoop and keen eyes, approached without hesitation. "You have your father's directness," he observed, though hopefully more of his wisdom than his temper. Timothy tensed. "You knew my father?" "Very well indeed," the old man replied. "Before he went to Lystra, before he created his merchant's identity, I knew him when he served directly in the governor's household in Antioch." Timothy's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" "My name is Coelius. I was your father's mentor, long." "Hago." The old man studied Timothy's face carefully. "You have his features, but your eyes, those belong to your mother. A fortunate balance." "Why are you following me? What do you want?" Coelius gestured to a stone bench beside the fountain. "A conversation, nothing more, about choices and consequences." Against his better judgment, Timothy sat. There was something in the old man's manner that commanded respect, a quiet authority reminiscent of his grandmother Lois. "Your father was not born a merchant," Coelius began without preamble. "He was the son of a prominent Roman official, trained for government service. His posting to Lystra was a cover. His true mission was to monitor religious movements that might threaten Roman stability." "I know this already," Timothy said stiffly. "I found the records." Ah, but do you know why he abandoned his mission? Why the promising young agent became in truth the merchant he pretended to be? Timothy frowned. What do you mean? Your mother, Coelius said simply. He fell in love with Eunice, genuinely, completely in love. And love has a way of transforming even the most certain of paths. The fountain bubbled softly beside them, its white noise covering their conversation from passers-by. Timothy struggled to reconcile this new information with his understanding of his parents' relationship. Are you saying he truly loved her? It wasn't part of his cover. Coelius's laugh was gentle. Young man, your father was many things, but never a good enough actor to maintain such a pretense for years. No, he loved your mother deeply, and in that love, he found himself increasingly uncomfortable with his role as Rome's eyes and ears. Yet the record showed he continued to inform on religious groups. At a much reduced capacity, Coelius corrected. Enough to avoid suspicion, but with carefully curated information that did minimal harm. It was a dangerous balancing act. Timothy thought of the arguments between his parents, how his father had always seemed torn between worlds, much as Timothy himself had been. Had that been the true source of his father's conflict? Not philosophical disagreement, but the strain of living a divided life? Why tell me this now? Timothy asked. Coelius's expression grew serious. Because Rome has not forgotten the son of one of its agents. There are those who believe you could be useful, given your current associations. You mean they want me to spy on Paul, Timothy translated flatly, to become what my father was? With greater scope and purpose, Coelius acknowledged. Your position is unique. You bridge worlds that rarely connect, Greek and Jewish, imperial and provincial, philosophical and spiritual. Such bridges have immense value. Timothy stood abruptly. I will not betray those who have accepted me fully, who have shown me a path beyond division. Coelius remained seated, unperturbed by the rejection. Consider carefully, Timothy. The empire can be either a powerful ally or a formidable enemy. Your mentor, Paul, understands this balance. Why else does he insist on working within Roman law, emphasizing his citizenship when convenient? Paul works within the law because his message transcends political structures, Timothy countered. He doesn't need to overthrow Rome to transform hearts. A convenient position, Coelius observed with a slight smile, and one that has allowed your movement to spread where more revolutionary approaches have been crushed. He rose slowly, his aged joints protesting the movement. I will leave you with this thought. Perhaps your divided heritage is not a weakness to be resolved, but a strength to be leveraged. Different loyalties need not conflict if properly understood. He pressed a sealed letter into Timothy's hand. When you're ready to discuss this further, instructions for contacting me are inside. Until then, consider this a gesture of good faith. The names of those who work with Demas and their plans for the immediate future. With a slight bow, Coelius melted into the crowd, leaving Timothy holding the letter with conflicted emotions. Information that could protect Paul and the others, but at what unstated price? That evening, Timothy shared the encounter with Priscilla and Aquila. They listened gravely, their faces showing the weight of this new complication. It could be a trap, Aquila warned. Information designed to lead you into danger. Or it could be genuine, Priscilla countered. Your father's past is clearly more complex than we realized. This Coelius may have his own agenda in sharing these details. Timothy broke the seal on the letter. Inside was a list of names. Alexander, the coppersmith among them, and details of planned actions against Paul's supporters in Ephesus. But what caught Timothy's eye was a personal note at the bottom. Your father's final report to Rome, submitted days before his death, requested that you be left untouched by imperial recruitment. He chose your freedom over his duty. Remember this when making your own choices. Timothy's vision blurred with unexpected tears. His father, the man who had disowned him for following Paul, had also, in his own way, tried to protect Timothy's future autonomy. I need time to think, Timothy said, refolding the letter carefully. That night, alone on the rooftop under a canopy of stars, Timothy wrestled with questions of identity and loyalty more complex than any he had faced before. His father had lived a divided life, not unlike Timothy's own, and had made choices to protect what he valued most. Was there wisdom in Chelius's suggestion that different loyalties could coexist? Could Timothy use his position to protect the growing community of believers without compromising his commitment to Paul's message? The stars offered no easy answers, but as Timothy traced the familiar constellations, Greek patterns in a Jewish sky, he felt a subtle shift within himself. The division he had struggled against all his life might actually be his unique contribution. Perhaps one could serve truth without serving only one version of it. With this tentative insight came, not certainty, but a kind of peace, the peace of accepting complexity rather than fighting against it. Timothy clutched his grandmother's amulet and whispered a prayer that combined Hebrew phrases with Greek philosophical concepts, a prayer uniquely his own, bridging worlds just as he himself did. Not resolution, he murmured to the night, but integration, not either or but both and. The Ephesian night cradled his words, and somewhere in the vast darkness, Timothy sensed a path beginning to emerge, one that honored all the threads of his complicated heritage while weaving them into Mao. Something new. A week passed. Ephesus hummed with tension as imperial officials increased their presence in the city. Using the information from Chelius, Timothy and the believers managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities, moving meeting locations and alerting those whose names appeared on the list of potential targets. Messages from Paul arrived regularly, carried by trusted couriers. The apostle planned to return to Ephesus once the immediate danger had passed, but in the meantime he entrusted Timothy with increasing responsibility for the growing community. "You're becoming a leader in your own right," Priscilla observed, one evening as they finished a teaching session with new believers. "It suits you," Timothy shook his head. "I'm merely standing in Paul's place temporarily." "Are you?" Priscilla's shrewd eyes held his. "Or are you finding your own place, one that honors Paul's teaching while expressing your unique perspective?" Before Timothy could respond, Aquila burst into the room, his usually calm demeanor visibly shaken. "Imperial guards are searching the harbor district," he reported. "They're checking all correspondence leaving the city. One of our couriers was detained." The implications were immediate and alarming. Their communication network with Paul and other communities of believers was compromised. Worse, any letters intercepted might contain names and locations that could endanger others. Timothy made a quick decision. "We need to warn Paul. I'll go myself, tonight." "Too dangerous," Aquila objected. "You're known to the authorities now." "Which is why I must go. They'll be watching for messengers, not for someone they believe might lead them to Paul." Timothy's voice held a new authority that surprised even himself. "And besides, I have resources others don't." He didn't elaborate, but his mind had turned to Chelius. If the old man truly wanted to recruit him, perhaps Timothy could leverage that interest to secure safe passage without committing to anything more. "Let me at least go with you to the city gates," Priscilla offered. Before departing, Timothy gathered essential scrolls, teachings that couldn't risk being lost in a raid. As he packed them carefully in an oiled leather pouch, a servant arrived with a small package wrapped in plain cloth. "Delivered for you," the servant explained. The messenger said it was urgent. Unwrapping the package, Timothy found a sealed scroll unlike any he had seen before. The parchment was unusually fine, the seal an intricate design that combined Roman and Eastern symbols. With it was a note in an elegant hand. "This belongs to you by right of birth. Open it only when you are ready to embrace your complete heritage. See, Chelius." The scroll must be connected to Timothy's father, perhaps explaining more about his true identity and work. Timothy's first impulse was to break the seal immediately, but something gave him pause. The timing of this delivery, just as he prepared. To leave Ephesus seemed too convenient. "What is it?" Priscilla asked, noticing his hesitation. "A message from the past," Timothy replied, tucking the sealed scroll deep in his travel pack. "One that can wait for a calmer moment." They left as night fell, using back streets to avoid the increased patrols. Near the western gate, Timothy and Priscilla paused in the shadows of a closed pottery shop. "Be cautious," Priscilla urged, embracing him briefly. not just of obvious dangers, but of subtle temptations. The path between worlds is never simple. Timothy nodded, understanding she referred not just to physical safety, but to the complex loyalties he was navigating. "I'll find Paul and return as soon as possible. If I'm not back within 10 days, you will be," Priscilla said firmly. "Go with God, Timothy." The journey began uneventfully. Timothy traveled by night and rested during the day, avoiding main roads where Imperial patrols were more likely. On the second night, however, as he passed through a small village north of Ephesus, he sensed he was being followed. Veering into a stand of olive trees, Timothy circled back and waited. Soon a figure appeared, moving with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to tracking. Moonlight glinted off metal, a dagger or short sword. Timothy's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain motionless. The pursuer paused, scanning the trees, then moved forward cautiously. When the figure passed directly beneath Timothy's hiding place in the branches, he dropped down, tackling the pursuer to the ground. They grappled briefly until Timothy managed to pin the smaller form beneath him. Pulling back the hood of the cloak, he found himself staring into the face of a young woman with fierce, intelligent eyes. "Who are you?" Timothy demanded, maintaining his hold. "Why are you following me?" "Release me and perhaps I'll tell you," she replied, her accent marking her as educated despite her rough attire. "I think not," Timothy countered. "Not until—" "I know who sent you." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, the woman relaxed beneath his grip. "My name is Lydian," she said. "I serve Coelius, as did your father before you." Timothy cautiously released her but remained alert for any sudden movements. "Coelius sent you to follow me. Why?" Lydian sat up, rubbing her wrists where he had held them. "To protect you, and the scroll. There are others searching for it who wouldn't hesitate to kill for its contents." "What is so important about this scroll?" Timothy asked, his suspicion evident. "It contains information that could either protect or destroy the movement you've joined," Lydian replied cryptically. "Coelius believes you are the only one who can determine its proper use." Timothy's hand moved instinctively to his pack, where the sealed scroll rested. "You expect me to believe Coelius, who wants me to inform on Paul, has my best interests at heart?" Lydian's laugh was short and bitter. "Coelius has no one's interests at heart but Rome's. But in this case, your safety serves his purposes." She rose gracefully to her feet. "I'm not asking you to trust me or him. I'm simply telling you that you're being hunted by multiple parties, and at least for now, our goals align." Against his better judgment, Timothy found himself believing her direct approach. "What do you propose?" "We travel together," she suggested. "You to find your Paul, me to ensure you and the scroll reach him safely. After that, our paths diverge." It was a pragmatic arrangement, though fraught with potential complications. Still, having an ally familiar with Imperial movements could prove invaluable, especially if, as Lydian claimed, others were hunting him. "Very well," Timothy agreed cautiously. "But understand this. I serve a message that transcends political power. If your true purpose is to undermine that mission, you will fail." Lydian's expression revealed nothing. "Understood. Now we should move. This area isn't secure." They traveled through the remainder of the night, Lydian leading them on, paths that avoided villages and military outposts. Her knowledge of the terrain was impressive, and Timothy found himself both grateful for her guidance and wary of her motivations. "How did you come to work for Coelius?" he asked, as they rested in a secluded grove near dawn. Lydian's face remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes, a brief glimpse of old pain. "My father was a Greek philosopher who spoke too freely about imperial politics. When I was 12, he disappeared. Coelius offered me protection and education in exchange for service." "That's not employment," Timothy observed. "That's exploitation." "Is it so different from your relationship with Paul?" she countered. "He offers spiritual protection and education in exchange for your service to his cause." The comparison unsettled Timothy, though he recognized its surface logic. "Paul doesn't demand loyalty through coercion or fear. He offers a choice, as he did when he first invited me to follow him. And you chose, Lydian acknowledged. As did I. We all serve something, Timothy of Lystra. The only question is whether we choose our masters or they choose us. As the sun rose, painting the landscape in gold and amber, Timothy found himself studying Lydian more carefully. Despite her hard edges, there was something compelling about her clarity of purpose, her absence of pretense. In some ways, she reminded him of his grandmother Lois, practical, direct, and unwilling to soften difficult truths. They continued their journey northward, making better progress than Timothy would have alone. By nightfall of the third day, they were approaching the small village where Paul had established temporary quarters. As they crested a hill overlooking the cluster of modest buildings, Lydian suddenly pulled Timothy into the shadow of a large oak. "Imperial Guards," she whispered, pointing to mounted soldiers near the village entrance. A patrol unit, not large enough for a raid, but enough to monitor comings and goings. Timothy's heart sank. "They've found him." "Not necessarily." Lydian assessed the situation with a tactical eye. "This could be routine surveillance, but your arrival now would definitely draw attention." They retreated to a safe distance to consider options. As they debated approaches, Timothy became acutely aware of the sealed scroll in his pack, the mysterious document that, according to Lydian, had multiple parties willing to kill for its contents. "Perhaps it's time," he said suddenly, interrupting their tactical discussion. "Time for what?" "To open the scroll," Timothy replied, removing the document from his pack. "If it contains information that could protect Paul and the others, we need to know before proceeding." Lydian's expression showed rare alarm. Coelius was explicit. "You should open it only when ready to embrace your full heritage." "Are you certain?" "That moment is now." The warning gave Timothy pause. Was he ready for whatever revelations the scroll might contain? His father's true identity and role had already shaken his understanding of himself. What further complications might this document introduce? Yet as he held the scroll, the weight of immediate responsibility outweighed these concerns. Paul might be in danger. The community in Ephesus relied on his successful mission. Personal revelations, however disturbing, would have to be secondary to these urgent realities. With deliberate movements, Timothy broke the ornate seal. The parchment unrolled with a soft whisper, revealing text in 3 languages, Latin, Greek, and Aramaic, arranged in parallel columns. At the top was an imperial insignia that made Lydian inhale sharply. "That's the seal of the Frumentari," she murmured. "The Imperial Intelligence Service. Whatever this is, it comes from the highest levels of Roman authority." Timothy began to read, his facility with all 3 languages allowing him to cross-reference between the columns. As he progressed, the blood drained from his face. The document was a comprehensive analysis of the growing movement of believers, its structure, its spread across the empire, its key leaders, and most alarmingly, its potential vulnerabilities. It contained information that only someone with intimate knowledge of the inner workings of Paul's mission could have provided. "This is impossible," Timothy whispered. "The details here, about internal matters, private conversations, future plans. Only someone in Paul's closest circle could know these things." Lydian's expression remained neutral, but her eyes watched him with sharp attention. "Perhaps your father's role was more extensive than you realized." Timothy shook his head emphatically. "My father was disowned me when I joined Paul." He couldn't have gathered this information. It's too recent, too specific to our current situation. As he continued reading, Timothy reached a section that made his hands tremble. A list of potential successors to Paul's leadership included his own name, with a detailed assessment of his strengths, weaknesses, and potential utility to Rome. The analysis was cold, thorough, and frightening in its accuracy. "This isn't just about my father," Timothy realized aloud. "It's about me, my position, my future. Someone is still reporting on me, with extraordinary access." The implications crashed over him like a wave. Someone in their inner circle, someone he trusted, was providing this detailed intelligence to Rome. The betrayal of Damas suddenly seemed like a minor prelude to a much more significant infiltration. Timothy rolled the scroll with unsteady hands, his mind racing. Who could it be? Silas had been with Paul for years. Priscilla and Aquila had risked their lives repeatedly for the mission. The other companions all showed unwavering commitment. Who among them served two masters? "What will you do now?" Lydian asked, breaking the heavy silence. Timothy looked toward the village where Paul waited, unaware of the layers of betrayal surrounding him. The sealed scroll had indeed contained vital information, but not the kind Timothy had expected. Now he faced an impossible choice: warn Paul about the betrayal without knowing who the traitor was, potentially alerting the very person feeding information to Rome, or keep this knowledge to himself while trying to uncover the hidden informant. "I need to reach Paul," he said finally. "But not through the main approach where the guards are watching." Lydian nodded. "There's a stream bed to the east that runs near the back of the village. It provides cover most of the way." As they gathered their things to move, Timothy studied Lydian anew. "Did you know what was in the scroll?" "No," she replied. "Coelius guards information carefully, sharing only what each operative needs to know. But I suspected it was significant. Documents with that seal rarely contain trivial matters." Timothy made a decision. "I want you to come with me to meet Paul." Surprise flashed across Lydian's face. "That wasn't our arrangement. I was to ensure you reached him safely, nothing more." "Plans changed," Timothy said firmly. "I need him to hear directly from you about Coelius, about my father's role, about this scroll, and I need to watch his reaction and the reactions of those with him." Lydian considered this, then nodded slowly. A trap to catch a traitor. Clever, but dangerous for all involved. The weight of the scroll seemed to grow heavier in Timothy's pack as they made their way toward the hidden approach to the village. The document had indeed forced him to confront his heritage, not just the legacy of his father, but his own position between worlds. Now he would need to leverage that liminal position in ways he had never anticipated. As the village lights appeared through the trees, Timothy touched the amulet his grandmother had given him. "Neither fully Greek nor fully Jewish," he murmured. "But perhaps that's exactly what's needed now. Someone who can navigate between worlds while belonging fully to neither." Lydian glanced at him curiously but said nothing. The final approach to the village lay ahead, and with it a confrontation that would test Timothy's understanding of loyalty, truth, and his own evolving identity. The small house on the outskirts of the village seemed unremarkable, a modest dwelling with chickens pecking in the yard and laundry hanging from a line. But Timothy knew that appearances were increasingly deceptive in his world. This unassuming place housed the man who had transformed his life, and potentially a traitor who threatened everything they worked for. Timothy and Lydian approached cautiously, staying low and using the gathering dusk as cover. At the back door, Timothy knocked in the pattern that had become their group's silent identifier. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slower ones. The door opened a crack, and Silas's familiar face appeared, registering first relief at seeing Timothy, then suspicion at the sight of Lydian. "I come with urgent information," Timothy said quietly. "And this is Lydian. She helped me evade Imperial patrols." Silas hesitated only briefly before widening the door. "Quickly then. There are eyes everywhere in this village." Inside, the humble house revealed its secret purpose. Maps covered the table, showing the spread of their message across Asia Minor. Scrolls containing teachings and letters to various communities were neatly organized. In a corner, Paul sat deep in conversation with 2 other companions, Titus and Aristarchus. Paul looked up, his weathered face brightening at the sight of Timothy, then growing cautious as he registered Lydian's presence. "You've brought a stranger among us," he observed, rising to his feet. "These are dangerous times for such introductions." "She helped me reach you safely," Timothy replied, "and she brings information connected to my father that concerns all of us." Paul studied Lydian with the penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond surfaces. "You work for Rome," he stated, rather than asked. Lydian met his gaze without flinching. "I work for Coelius, who serves Rome's interests. But I've brought Timothy here because there are greater complexities at play than simple loyalty to empire or faith. Timothy placed his travel pack on the table. "I need to speak with you privately. Paul, what I've discovered affects everything." The others exchanged glances, but at Paul's nod they moved to another room. Only Silas remained, positioning himself near the door, a silent guardian. When they were alone, Timothy withdrew the sealed scroll, now re-rolled and retied with a simple cord. "This was delivered to me just before I left Ephesus. It contains detailed information about our movement, internal matters that only someone close to us could know." Paul accepted the scroll with grave expression. As he read, his face remained impassive, betraying neither shock nor alarm, the disciplined response of a man who had faced countless crises. Only when he reached the section about Timothy did a flash of anger cross his features. "This assessment of you is coldly accurate," Paul observed. "Someone has been watching you very carefully, evaluating your potential uses, to us and to Rome." "Someone in our inner circle," Timothy confirmed. "The betrayal goes deeper than Demas." Paul rolled the scroll carefully and returned it to Timothy. "What does your companion know of this?" "Only that the scroll exists and is valuable. She was assigned to protect me and it by Coelius, the same man who mentored my father in his work for Rome." Paul turned to Lydian. "And what is your interest in this matter? Surely not the spiritual well-being of our communities." Lydian's response was direct. "I follow orders. Coelius wants Timothy safe and the scroll delivered. Beyond that, my personal interests are irrelevant." "I disagree," Paul countered. "No one serves without some personal investment. Even imperial agents have hearts and minds of their own." A subtle tension entered Lydian's posture. "My father was executed for speaking against imperial policies. I serve Coelius because the alternative was less appealing. Is that personal?" "Enough for you." Paul's expression softened slightly. "It is a beginning. Now, Timothy, what do you make of this situation? The scroll was entrusted to you. What does your heart tell you to do with this knowledge?" Timothy had been pondering this question since breaking the seal. "We need to identify the informant without alerting them. I've considered creating controlled information, unique details, shared with different individuals to see what appears in future reports." Paul nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. But first, we must ensure our immediate safety. This village is being watched, as you noticed. We'll need to move tonight, separately, to multiple locations." "I can help with that," Lydian offered unexpectedly. "I know which routes are being monitored and which remain clear." Paul studied her with renewed interest. "Why would you assist us? It seems counter to your assignment." "My assignment was to ensure Timothy and the scroll reached you safely," Lydian replied. "Beyond that, I have discretion, and I find myself curious about what drives men and women to risk everything for invisible gods and promises of kingdoms beyond Rome's reach." Timothy recognized something in her words, the same questioning that had once prompted his own journey. But before the conversation could continue, urgent whispers came from the adjoining room. Silas moved to investigate, returning moments later with alarm evident on his face. "Imperial officers are conducting house searches at the north end of the village," he reported. "They're moving systematically southward." Paul rose immediately. "We need to divide the scrolls and maps. Each person takes a portion to different safe locations." He turned to Timothy. "You should take the most sensitive documents, the letters to Ephesus and Corinth, and this." He handed Timothy a small leather case containing what appeared to be personal writings. "What about the imperial scroll?" Timothy asked. "Keep it with you," Paul advised. "It may yet reveal more about our hidden adversary." They worked quickly, distributing materials and planning escape routes. Lydian sketched a rough map of patrol patterns she had observed, marking the safest paths out of the village. Throughout these preparations, Timothy watched the interactions carefully, alert for any sign of unusual interest or behavior that might betray the informant. "We'll reconvene in Troas in 10 days' time," Paul instructed. "Until then, communicate only through the established network of trusted households." The group prepared to separate, each taking a different direction into the night. As Timothy secured his pack containing both church documents and the imperial scroll, Paul drew him aside for a final word. "Timothy, your position has always been unique. bridging worlds that rarely connect. Now you must use that gift more consciously than ever before." "What do you mean?" Timothy asked. Paul's eyes held a mixture of compassion and challenge. "The informant's report described you as having divided loyalties that make you valuable. They see this as your weakness, but I have always seen it as your strength." Timothy frowned. "I don't have divided loyalties. I've committed fully to our cause." "That is true," Paul acknowledged, "but you carry the capacity to understand different worlds, Jewish and Greek, imperial and spiritual. This understanding doesn't dilute your commitment, it enriches it. Use that capacity now. See with more than one set of eyes." Before Timothy could press for clarification, the signal came. It was time to move. Paul embraced him briefly. "Trust the spirit within you, Timothy. It will guide you through these divided paths." Timothy nodded, though uncertainty lingered. As the group dispersed into the darkness, he found Lydian waiting for him at the edge of the property. "You're coming with me?" he asked, surprised. "My assignment isn't complete," she replied simply. "Coelius would expect me to stay with you until the situation resolves." Timothy wasn't sure whether to feel reassured or concerned by her continued presence, but pragmatism won out. Her knowledge of imperial movements remained valuable, and keeping her close allowed him to monitor her actions. They traveled through the night, avoiding main roads and patrols with Lydian's expert guidance. By dawn, they had reached a small cave in the hills several miles from the village. It offered shelter and a defensible position for rest. As they settled in, Timothy couldn't help asking the question that had been forming since their departure. "What does Coelius really want with me? It can't be just about delivering the scroll." Lydian removed her cloak and arranged it as a makeshift pillow before answering. "Coelius believes you have potential that Paul has recognized but not fully developed." "Potential for what?" "For bridging worlds in a way few can," she said, echoing Paul's earlier words with unsettling precision. "Rome doesn't wish to destroy the movement you've joined. That would only drive it underground and make it more dangerous. They wish to understand it, to shape it into something that can coexist with imperial authority." Timothy shook his head. "Our message transcends political structures. It can't be shaped to serve Rome's purposes." "Can't it?" Lydian challenged. "Your Paul carefully emphasizes respect for governing authorities. He uses his Roman citizenship when convenient. He works within the system while spreading ideas that could ultimately transform it." The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. "That's not manipulation," Timothy countered. "It's wisdom. The kingdom we serve isn't established through political revolution, but through changed hearts." "A convenient position," Lydian remarked, unconsciously echoing Coelius's earlier comment. "And one that has allowed your movement to spread, where more revolutionary approaches have been crushed." Timothy felt a strange doubling of perspective, as if he were simultaneously seeing the conversation through his own eyes and through the calculating gaze of Rome. Was this what Paul had meant about seeing with more than one set of eyes? "Get some rest," Lydian advised, interrupting his thoughts. "I'll take first watch." As exhaustion overtook him, Timothy's mind continued to circle the problem of the informant. Who, among their trusted circle, had the access, the opportunity, and the motivation to provide such detailed intelligence to Rome? And more troublingly, what was their ultimate purpose? In the liminal space between waking and sleep, an unsettling thought took shape. What if the informant believed they were protecting the movement by collaborating with Rome? What if, like Timothy's father, they occupied a middle ground, providing enough information to satisfy their imperial handlers while trying to prevent more direct intervention? This possibility, that the betrayal might come from complex motives rather than simple malice, followed Timothy into uneasy dreams where his father's face blended with his own, both reflected in still water that suddenly rippled to reveal Paul's features beneath the surface. When he awoke hours later, the cave was filled with afternoon light. Lydian sat at the entrance, alert but relaxed, whittling a small piece of wood with practiced movements. "No signs of pursuit," she reported without looking up. "We should reach Troas ahead of schedule if we maintain this pace." Timothy sat up, his mind clearer after rest. "You never answered my question fully. What does Coelius want me to do?" "What is the purpose of showing me the scroll, making me aware of the informant?" Lydian set aside her carving. Coelius believes that knowledge of competing loyalties forces clarity of choice. By showing you the complexity of the situation, the informant in your midst, your father's role, Rome's ongoing interest, he forces you to decide where you truly stand. "I've already decided," Timothy insisted. "I've committed to Paul's mission, to spreading the message of Christ." "Have you?" Lydian's gaze was penetrating. "Or have you committed to Paul himself? There's a difference that will become increasingly important as events unfold." The distinction struck Timothy with unexpected force. His loyalty to Paul was absolute, but was that the same as loyalty to the message Paul carried? If they somehow diverged, where would Timothy's ultimate allegiance lie? "You're trying to create division where none exists," he said, but with less certainty than he intended. Lydian shrugged. "I'm merely pointing out that all of us serve multiple loyalties, to people, to principles, to purposes. The question is which takes precedence when they conflict." Timothy gathered his belongings, uncomfortable with how accurately Lydian's words probed his unspoken concerns. "We should continue to Troas. I want to arrive early to secure safe locations for the others." As they resumed their journey, Timothy found himself examining his motivations with new scrutiny. His commitment to Paul's mission remained unshaken, but he could no longer ignore the complexity of the path ahead, nor the possibility that his unique position between worlds might require choices he had not anticipated. The imperial scroll in his pack seemed to grow heavier with each step, a physical reminder of the knowledge he now carried. Knowledge of a betrayal within their circle, knowledge of Rome's calculating interest in their movement, knowledge of his own potential role in bridging divided worlds. Multiple loyalties, he murmured to himself as they walked, not a weakness to be resolved, but a complexity to be navigated. Perhaps that was what both Paul and Coelius, in their vastly different ways, were trying to help him understand. The journey to Troas continued without incident for 3 days. Timothy and Lydian established an uneasy rhythm, traveling by night, resting during daylight hours in secluded locations, maintaining minimal conversation. Despite her continued assistance, Timothy remained vigilant, aware that her ultimate loyalty lay elsewhere. On the 4th day, as they approached a narrow valley that marked the final stretch toward Troas, Lydian suddenly raised her hand in warning. They crouched behind a large boulder as a Roman patrol passed on the road below. 6 soldiers escorting a prisoner in chains. Timothy stifled a gasp as he recognized the captive. "That's Aristarchus, one of our companions from the village." "They're heading toward the garrison at Assos," Lydian observed, standard procedure for interrogating political prisoners. Timothy's mind raced. Aristarchus had been with Paul for years, a devoted believer who had faced persecution before. Now he was captured, perhaps because of information provided by their hidden informant. "We have to help him," Timothy decided. Lydian's expression hardened. "That would be foolish. You have documents that need to reach Troas, information about an informant in your inner circle. Risking that for one man is strategically unsound." "It's not about strategy," Timothy countered. "It's about loyalty to those who share our path." "Even if that loyalty might compromise your larger mission," Lydian challenged. "This is exactly the kind of emotional decision that makes Rome view your movement as unpredictable." Timothy studied her carefully. "You sound like you're testing me. Is this another of Coelius's scenarios?" Lydian's expression revealed nothing. "I'm merely pointing out the choice before you. Continue to Troas with your critical information, or risk everything for one companion who may already have revealed what he knows under questioning." The implication hung in the air between them. Could Aristarchus be the informant? His capture seemed too convenient, a way to remove suspicion while actually extracting him from a dangerous position. Timothy weighed the possibilities. If Aristarchus was the traitor, his capture was likely staged, and intervention would be walking into a trap. If he was innocent, he faced torture and possible execution. The wrong choice could be catastrophic. "I need more information before deciding," Timothy said finally. "We'll follow at a distance, observe the situation at Assos, then determine the best course." Lydian nodded, seeming almost approving of this measured response. They altered their route, maintaining a parallel path to the Roman patrol, but staying hidden in the rugged terrain. By nightfall, the lights of Assos were visible in the distance, a small port city dominated by the stone walls of its garrison. From a hillside overlooking the approach to the city, they watched as Aristarchus was escorted through the main gates. The efficiency of the procedure suggested routine rather than special handling, which argued against the capture being staged. "We need to get into the city," Timothy decided. "Find out where they're holding him and what they plan to do. I can enter more easily alone," Lydian pointed out. "I have contacts within imperial structures. You would only draw attention." Timothy hesitated. Sending Lydian alone meant trusting her completely, something he wasn't prepared to do. Yet, her logic was sound. She could move within imperial circles in ways he couldn't. "Very well," he agreed cautiously. "But we establish clear parameters. You gather information only. Where Aristarchus is being held, the charges against him, planned. Procedures. No independent actions, no revealing our presence. Meet me back here by midnight." Lydian's slight smile suggested she found his attempt at command amusing but didn't object. "Agreed. If I'm not back by midnight, assume I've been compromised, and proceed to Troas without me." She removed her distinctive cloak, adjusted her appearance to look more like a typical traveler, and made her way down the hillside toward the city gates. Timothy watched until she disappeared from view, then retreated to a sheltered position where he could monitor the road while remaining hidden. Alone with his thoughts, Timothy removed the imperial scroll from his pack, studying it again for any clue about the informant's identity. The level of detail suggested someone with constant access to Paul's inner circle. Aristarchus fit that description, but so did Silas, Titus, and several others. More troubling was the psychological assessment of Timothy himself. The scroll described his divided cultural heritage as both a vulnerability and an asset, suggesting ways this could be exploited to make him receptive to Roman overtures. The clinical analysis of his character, his desire to belong, his respect for authority, his mediating tendencies, was disturbing in its accuracy. "Who sees me this clearly?" he murmured. The level of insight suggested not just proximity, but intimate understanding. Someone who had observed Timothy's growth and development over time. A sudden, chilling possibility struck him. Could Paul himself be the informant? The thought seemed blasphemous, yet it would explain the detailed knowledge, the precise assessments. Paul's emphasis on working within Roman structures, his frequent reminders about respecting authority, were these genuine theological positions or calculated strategies to make their movement acceptable to Rome? Timothy rejected the thought immediately. He had witnessed Paul's sacrifices, his sincerity, his willingness to suffer for his convictions. Whatever complexity existed in Paul's approach to Roman authority, it wasn't duplicity. Yet the seed of doubt, once planted, couldn't be entirely uprooted. Timothy recalled Paul's words about seeing with more than one set of eyes. Was there a deeper meaning there, an acknowledgement of necessary compromise in a world of competing powers? The hours passed slowly. Timothy alternated between watching the road and wrestling with these unsettling questions. Midnight approached and still Lydian had not returned. Had she been captured? Or had she reported to her true masters, betraying Timothy's position? Just as he prepared to leave, assuming the worst, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Lydian approached silently, her face grim in the moonlight. "Aristarchus is being held in the eastern tower," she reported without preamble. "The charges are sedition and unlawful assembly. Standard procedure is 3 days of questioning before transfer to a regional governor for sentencing." "Questioning," Timothy repeated. The euphemism didn't hide the reality of what that entailed. "Did you learn anything about his capture? Was it based on specific information?" The patrol commander's report mentioned an anonymous tip about traveling companions of the Jew called Paul. Nothing more specific. This suggested opportunistic enforcement rather than targeted action based on detailed intelligence, which argued against Aristarchus being the informant. If he was the source, his handlers would have extracted him more carefully. "We need to get him out," Timothy decided. Lydian's expression hardened. "That's beyond my agreement to help you. Breaking a prisoner out of an imperial garrison is treason, punishable by crucifixion. I'm not asking you to participate, Timothy clarified, but I need information, guard rotations, access points, anything that might help. You're still planning to go to Troas first, deliver the documents and information to Paul, then return with more resources? Lydian asked. Timothy shook his head. There's no time. The questioning begins tomorrow. By the time I reached Troas and returned with help, it would be too late. Lydian studied him intently. You would risk everything. The documents, the identification of the informant. Your own freedom for one companion? Yes, Timothy's response was immediate and certain. Because that's the essence of what we believe, that each person has immeasurable value. If I abandoned Aristarchus for strategic advantage, I would betray the very message I claim to serve. Something shifted in Lydian's expression, a subtle change that might have been respect. You surprise me, Timothy of Lystra. Most men I've known speak of principles, but abandon them when consequences become real. She reached into her tunic and withdrew a small scroll. The garrison layout, guard rotations, and the location of Aristarchus's cell. I obtained this while you were debating whether to trust me. Timothy accepted the scroll with astonishment. You anticipated my decision? I observed your pattern of choices, Lydian replied simply. You consistently prioritize loyalty to persons over abstract strategy. It's both your greatest strength and your most exploitable weakness. The assessment echoed the imperial scroll's language uncomfortably. And yet, you're helping me, knowing I'm choosing a course Quilius would consider foolish. Lydian's smile held no warmth. Perhaps I'm following my own assessment of the situation, or perhaps I'm executing a deeper strategy you don't perceive. Either way, you now have what you need to attempt a rescue, though I still advise against it. Through the night, they planned a daring approach. The eastern tower where Aristarchus was held had a vulnerability. A drainage channel that passed beneath the foundation, originally built when the structure served as a grain storage facility. Long disused, it might provide access, if Timothy could squeeze through its narrow confines. The night watch changes at the 4th hour, Lydian explained, pointing to her diagram. There's a brief period when attention is focused on the transferring of duties. That's your window. Timothy studied the plan, mentally preparing himself for what lay ahead. And you? What will you do while I attempt this? Maintain a position outside the walls, Lydian replied. If you succeed, we'll need to move quickly. If you fail. She left the consequence unstated. As dawn approached, Timothy organized his resources. He couldn't risk taking the church documents or the imperial scroll into the garrison. If he was captured, they would become evidence against the entire movement. He wrapped them carefully and buried them beneath a distinctive rock formation where he could retrieve them later. One more thing, Lydian said, as Timothy prepared to depart. From her boot, she removed a small dagger with an imperial insignia on its hilt. This identifies its bearer as a low-level imperial agent. If you're cornered, it might create enough confusion to buy you time. Timothy hesitated before accepting the weapon. Won't this compromise your position? There are many such daggers, Lydian replied vaguely. Besides, success in my role depends on adaptability. The implications of her assistance troubled Timothy. Was this another test, or was Lydian beginning to question her own allegiances? There was no time to untangle these complexities. With a nod of thanks, he concealed the dagger in his belt and began his approach to the city. The pre-dawn hours provided cover as Timothy made his way to the eastern side of the garrison. The drainage channel was where Lydian had indicated, its entrance partially concealed by accumulated debris and vegetation. Timothy cleared just enough to squeeze through, then entered the narrow passage. The channel was tighter than anticipated, forcing Timothy to wriggle forward on his stomach, fighting claustrophobia. As the earthen walls pressed in around him, the air grew stale and heavy with moisture as he progressed deeper beneath the foundation. Finally, after what seemed like hours of breathless crawling, Timothy reached a rusted grate that separated the drainage channel from the garrison's interior. Years of corrosion had weakened the metal, allowing him to break through with focused pressure. He emerged into a damp storage cellar, thick with the smell of mildew and abandoned supplies. Following Lydian's directions, he located the narrow stairway leading up to the cell level. Pressing his ear to the door at the top, he listened for guard movements, counting the measured footsteps that marked their patrol pattern. When the footsteps receded, Timothy eased the door open and slipped into a dimly lit corridor lined with cell doors. Moving silently, he counted doors until he reached the one Lydian had identified. A small viewing slot allowed him to peer inside. Aristarchus lay on a simple pallet, his face bruised but his breathing steady. The sight sent a wave of relief through Timothy. His friend was alive, though clearly they had already begun their questioning. The lock was simple but sturdy. Timothy had anticipated this and brought small metal tools fashioned from his belt. Buckle. With focused concentration, he worked the mechanism, gratified when it finally yielded with a soft click. Aristarchus started at the sound of the door opening, his body tensing for expected violence. When he recognized Timothy, disbelief washed over his features. "How?" he began, but Timothy pressed a finger to his lips for silence. "Can you walk?" Timothy whispered. Aristarchus nodded, wincing as he rose to his feet. Together they moved to the corridor, pausing at the intersection to ensure the way was clear. The guard rotation was occurring as Lydian had predicted, creating a brief window of opportunity. They had almost reached the cellar door when a shout echoed behind them. A guard had returned early, discovering the empty cell. Within moments, the alarm was raised, voices calling, footsteps pounding, metal clanging as weapons were gathered. "Go," Timothy urged, pushing Aristarchus toward the cellar door. "Follow the drainage channel all the way out. Someone is waiting to guide you to safety." "What about you?" Aristarchus protested. "I'll create a diversion, draw them in another direction," Timothy replied. "Go now." As Aristarchus disappeared down the cellar steps, Timothy ran in the opposite direction, deliberately making noise to attract attention. His gambit worked. Guards converged on his position, allowing Aristarchus precious time to escape. Timothy led his pursuers through a series of corridors, staying just ahead of capture. When he finally found himself cornered in a small courtyard, he drew Lydian's dagger, making sure the imperial insignia was visible. "Stand down," he commanded with an authority he didn't feel. "I am on imperial business." The guards hesitated, confusion evident in their expressions. The insignia was having the intended effect, creating uncertainty about Timothy's identity and authority. "What imperial business involves freeing prisoners?" demanded one guard, clearly the senior officer present. "Matters beyond your clearance," Timothy replied coldly, channeling the aristocratic arrogance he had observed in Roman officials. The bluff might have worked with regular guards, but the officer was not so easily intimidated. "Arrest him," he ordered. "Let the commander sort out his claims." Timothy knew he couldn't defeat multiple armed guards. As they closed in, he attempted a desperate gambit, throwing the dagger at the nearest torch, plunging the courtyard into partial darkness, then making a running leap for the adjacent wall. His fingers found purchase on the rough stone, and he began to climb. A spear clattered against the wall beside him, missing by inches. Another guard was taking aim when a commotion at the main gate diverted their attention. Shouts, the clash of metal, voices raised in alarm. Timothy didn't waste the opportunity. He reached the top of the wall and vaulted over, landing hard on the ground outside. Pain shot through his ankle, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He limped away from the garrison, using buildings and shadows for cover. At their designated meeting point outside the city, Timothy found Lydian and Aristarchus waiting. To his surprise, 3 imperial guards lay bound and gagged nearby. "Your diversion worked," Lydian explained, noting his puzzled expression. "But we needed a more substantial distraction to get you out. These 3 should recover with nothing. Worse than headaches and wounded pride." Timothy's respect for her capabilities increased, though questions multiplied about her true allegiance. "We need to move quickly," he said, prioritizing immediate safety over longer-term mysteries. "The alarm will spread to surrounding areas soon." Aristarchus was weak but mobile. Supporting him between them, Timothy and Lydian made their way into the rugged terrain north of Assos. Once they had put sufficient distance between themselves and pursuers, they paused in a sheltered ravine for Aristarchus to rest. How did they capture you? Timothy asked, offering water from his flask. Aristarchus drank deeply before answering. Routine patrol stopped me outside Mytilene. They found letters from Paul in my possession. Nothing incriminating, but enough to identify me as his associate. He looked searchingly at Timothy. Who is your companion? Lydian, Timothy supplied. She's been helping me reach Troas. The deliberate vagueness wasn't lost on Aristarchus, who studied Lydian with open suspicion. You're not one of the believers? No, Lydian confirmed without elaboration. Timothy redirected the conversation. Did they question you specifically about our movements, our structure? Did they seem to have prior knowledge? Aristarchus frowned. They knew more than they should, asked about specific locations, named individuals they shouldn't have known were connected to us. Someone has been providing information. We know, Timothy said grimly. That's part of what I'm bringing to Paul in Troas. Evidence of an informant in our inner circle. Aristarchus straightened, despite his evident pain. Then we must hurry. If there's a traitor among us, no one is safe, especially Paul. They retrieved the buried documents and resumed their journey, now with greater urgency. The addition of Aristarchus complicated their progress. His injuries slowed their pace, and his presence made them more identifiable to patrols searching for escaped prisoners. As they traversed the valley that would lead them to Troas, Timothy found himself in a strange mental territory. The rescue of Aristarchus felt right, aligned with the core principles of the message he served. Yet the strategic cost was potentially enormous. They were now fugitives, their descriptions circulating among imperial forces. The documents they carried, if captured, would endanger the entire movement. Had he made the right choice? Or had he allowed personal loyalty to override the greater mission? The Imperial Scroll's assessment of his character seemed prophetic, identifying his tendency to prioritize individual relationships over abstract strategy as his exploitable vulnerability. But as Timothy watched Aristarchus walking painfully but determinedly ahead, he couldn't accept that compassion was a weakness to be overcome. If their message of divine love meant anything, it had to be embodied in actions, not just words. The rescue wasn't a strategic error, but a necessary expression of the truth they proclaimed. This realization brought a certain clarity. The divisions Timothy had struggled with all his life, Greek and Jewish, philosophical and spiritual, personal and political, were not weaknesses to be resolved, but tensions to be navigated. The middle path wasn't compromise but integration, holding seemingly opposing truths in creative tension. As night fell over the valley, Timothy felt a subtle shift within himself, not resolution, but a deeper acceptance of complexity. The path ahead remained shadowed with uncertainty, but he moved forward with a growing conviction that his divided heritage had prepared him precisely for such a journey between worlds. The walls of Troas rose before them on the third day after Aristarchus's rescue. The port city hummed with activity, merchants haggling, sailors unloading cargo, travelers from across the empire mingling in its bustling streets. Such chaos provided excellent cover but also multiplied potential dangers. We need to separate, Timothy decided, as they observed the city from a hillside vantage point. 3 travelers together, 1 injured, will draw attention. I should enter alone, Aristarchus suggested. I'm already known to the believers in Troas. They'll shelter me while you find a safer way to bring in the documents. Timothy shook his head. You're a fugitive. Imperial descriptions will have reached the city gates by now. I can take him through secondary channels, Lydian offered unexpectedly. There are ways into the city that avoid official scrutiny, paths used by those who prefer to remain invisible to authority. Timothy studied her, still uncertain of her shifting loyalties. And the documents? Should I entrust those to you as well? Something like hurt flashed across Lydian's usually impassive features. After everything, you still question where I stand? I question where everyone stands, Timothy replied honestly, including myself. A tense silence fell between them. Finally, Aristarchus spoke. The Imperial Scroll should remain with you, Timothy, but the church documents could come with us, distributed between Lydian and myself to minimize risk. The suggestion was sensible. Timothy reluctantly divided. The materials, keeping only the imperial scroll and Paul's personal writings in his own pack. "We meet at the house of Carpus near the Western Forum," he instructed. "Paul will be there or will have left instructions." They parted ways at midday, Lydian leading Aristarchus toward a concealed entrance she knew on the eastern side of the city. Timothy approached the main gate alone, adopting the demeanor of a merchant's assistant on routine business. The guards at the gate were performing cursory inspections, more concerned with collecting proper taxes than security. Timothy passed through without incident, breathing a silent prayer of thanks as he entered the crowded streets of Troas. He made his way carefully to the Western Forum, maintaining awareness of his surroundings while avoiding any appearance of furtiveness. The house of Carpus, a respected physician who had embraced Paul's message early, was modest but well-maintained, set slightly back from the street. Timothy knocked at the door using the pattern that identified him to fellow believers. A servant opened it cautiously, then ushered him inside with evident relief. "We've been watching for you," the man explained, leading Timothy to an inner courtyard where Carpus waited. The physician embraced Timothy warmly. "Paul said you would come, though he expected you days ago." "There were complications," Timothy explained. "Is Paul here?" Carpus's expression grew somber. He was. "He waited as long as he felt was safe, then continued on to Macedonia yesterday. He left specific instructions for you." Disappointment washed over Timothy. After everything, the revelations about his father, the imperial scroll, the rescue of Aristarchus. He had hoped for Paul's steady guidance in person. Now he would need to process these complexities alone. "I have two companions who should arrive separately," Timothy informed Carpus. "Aristarchus, whom you know, and a woman named Lydian, whom you don't. They carry important documents." Carpus nodded. "We'll watch for them. In the meantime, you should rest. You look exhausted." Timothy gratefully accepted the offer of food and a private room. After weeks of constant vigilance, the simple security of closed doors and friendly faces was profoundly restorative. He bathed, ate a modest meal, and then settled to examine Paul's instructions. The letter was characteristically direct. Timothy was to wait in Troas for 1 week. If all went well, additional companions would arrive, and together they would continue to Macedonia to rejoin Paul. If complications arose, Timothy was to use his judgment about proceeding alone or finding alternate routes. A personal note followed the practical instructions. "Timothy, my true son in the faith, I sense that you are facing questions that test not only your courage, but your understanding of yourself. Remember that the spirit of truth is not a spirit of fear. Whatever you discover about others or yourself, know that your value isn't in what you accomplish, but in who you are, beloved." The words brought unexpected tears to Timothy's eyes. Paul had anticipated the turmoil of identity and purpose that Timothy was experiencing, not through prophetic insight, but through knowing him deeply. This led Timothy back to the troubling question. If someone knew him well enough to create the psychological profile in the imperial scroll, could it be Paul himself? Was his mentor playing a more complex game than Timothy had recognized? He unrolled the imperial scroll again, studying it with fresh eyes. Something about the Greek column caught his attention, subtle phrases and constructions that seemed familiar. Where had he encountered that particular style before? A knock at the door interrupted his analysis. It was Carpus, his expression concerned. "Aristarchus has arrived, but alone," he reported. "The woman you mentioned, Lydian, is nowhere to be found." Alarmed, Timothy followed Carpus to where Aristarchus rested, his injuries tended by the physician's skilled hands. "What happened?" Timothy demanded. "Where is Lydian?" Aristarchus grimaced as Carpus applied a medicinal salve to his bruised ribs. "We were approaching the eastern entrance when Imperial guards appeared, searching everyone. Lydian pushed me into a concealed alcove, then deliberately revealed herself to lead them away." Timothy's stomach tightened with dread. "She sacrificed herself to ensure your passage." "So it seemed," Aristarchus confirmed. "Though I admit I've questioned her motives from the beginning. Who is she really? Why was she traveling with you?" The question demanded more explanation than Timothy was prepared to give in front of Carpus. "It's complicated," he answered. evasively. Did she still have the documents when she was taken? No, she transferred them to me before we reached the city perimeter. Insurance, she called it, almost as if she anticipated something going wrong. This detail bothered Timothy deeply. Had Lydian planned her capture? Was it part of some larger strategy he couldn't perceive? Or had she genuinely sacrificed herself to protect their mission? I need to find her, Timothy decided. Aristarchus shook his head emphatically. That would be foolish. If she was captured, they'll be watching for associates. You're carrying information that could compromise everything. And if she wasn't captured, Timothy countered, if this is part of some deeper game, then I need to know what she's planning. The debate continued until Carpus intervened. Nothing can be done tonight. The city gates are closed, patrols are increased after dark. Wait until morning, and we can gather information about anyone detained by the authorities. Timothy reluctantly agreed, though sleep eluded him. His mind raced with scenarios and possibilities. Had Lydian betrayed them finally? Was she reporting to Coelius even now, or was she in an imperial cell suffering for her unexpected loyalty to their cause? By morning, the household was active with discreet information gathering, trusted contacts. In the marketplace, the harbour, even the administrative buildings brought fragments of news. Imperial patrols had indeed captured a woman matching Lydian's description, but strangely, she had been released after questioning. Released? Timothy repeated, incredulous. That makes no sense unless she's working with them, Aristarchus finished grimly. I warned you she couldn't be trusted. Timothy wasn't convinced. The pattern of Lydian's actions, helping him reach Paul, providing crucial information for Aristarchus's rescue, transferring documents before her capture, suggested more complex motivations than simple betrayal. I need to find her, he insisted, to understand what's happening. Against Aristarchus's continued objections, Timothy disguised himself as a dock worker and ventured into the city. For 2 days, he searched markets, taverns, public squares, any place Lydian might appear if she remained in Troas. On the 3rd day, as he was about to abandon the search, he spotted her in the eastern market haggling with a spice merchant as if she had nothing to hide. He approached cautiously, positioning himself at a neighboring stall until she completed her purchase. When she turned to leave, he fell into step beside her. You're taking quite a risk, he said quietly. Lydian didn't break stride or show surprise at his presence. As are you, especially since I could be leading you into a trap. Are you? Her sideways glance held a hint of amusement. If I were, would I answer truthfully? They continued walking, maintaining the appearance of casual acquaintances. Why were you released? Timothy asked directly. Because I showed them this, Lydian replied, discreetly revealing a document bearing an imperial seal, an official authentication of her status as an agent of Rome. Timothy stopped abruptly. So you are working actively for Rome? Everything, helping me find Paul, rescuing Aristarchus, it was all part of your assignment. Lydian pulled him into the shadow of a columned portico, away from curious ears. My relationship with Rome is more complicated than you imagine, she said, her voice low and intense. As is yours, whether you acknowledge it or not. What do you mean? The scroll you carry, did you ever wonder why Coelius wanted you to have it? Why expose an active informant, potentially compromising years of intelligence work? Timothy had indeed wondered this. I assumed it was to force me to choose sides, to push me toward working with Rome to protect my companions. That's part of it, Lydian acknowledged. But there's more. Coelius believes the informant has gone beyond reporting and has begun actively manipulating events, pursuing personal aims rather than Rome's interests. This was an unexpected angle. Are you saying Rome wants the informant exposed? Rome wants stability, Lydian corrected. Your movement, properly managed, doesn't threaten that stability. It might even enhance it, providing moral structure without political revolution. But a rogue agent pushing for persecution creates the very martyrs that fuel resistance. Timothy's mind raced with implications. Do you know who it is, the informant? Lydian's expression remained carefully neutral. I have suspicions, as I'm sure you do, but Coelius believes you need to discover the truth yourself, that an outsider's revelation wouldn't be believed. And what happens when I do identify this person? What does Rome expect then? That depends on you, Lydian replied, on what kind of leader you choose to become. The statement startled Timothy. Leader? I'm not. Aren't you? Lydian challenged. Paul is grooming you as his successor. The informant's reports make that clear. The question is what kind of leader you'll be. One who can work within existing structures while gradually transforming them, or one who creates unnecessary conflict that benefits neither side. Timothy felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. You're suggesting I should collaborate with Rome? Compromise our message? I'm suggesting you recognize reality, Lydian countered. Rome isn't going anywhere, neither is your movement. The question is whether they'll exist in perpetual conflict or find a sustainable relationship. These words echoed Paul's own teachings about respecting governing authorities, yet hearing them from an imperial agent cast them in a different light. Was Paul's approach pragmatic wisdom or subtle compromise? I need to think, Timothy said finally, and I need to identify the informant before making any decisions. Lydian nodded. Wise, but be careful. The informant knows you have the scroll by now. They'll take steps to protect themselves, perhaps by directing suspicion toward others. Including you? A ghost of a smile touched Lydian's lips. I'm already the obvious suspect, aren't I? The mysterious companion with imperial connections. Very convenient. The observation was unsettlingly accurate. Aristarchus already suspected Lydian, would naturally assume she was the source of leaked information. But what if that misdirection was exactly what the true informant intended? Meet me tomorrow at midday, Timothy decided, by the Temple of Apollo. There's something I need to confirm before proceeding. Lydian studied him carefully. You're beginning to think like someone who navigates between worlds, she observed. Coelius would be pleased. I'm not doing this for Coelius, Timothy replied, firmly. No, Lydian agreed. You're doing it because it's who you are, a bridge between divided realms. It's what makes you valuable to Paul, to Rome, and to the future of both. They parted ways, Timothy returning to Carpus's house with his mind churning. He found Aristarchus and Carpus reviewing the church documents, planning for the journey to Macedonia. Any sign of the woman? Aristarchus asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. None, Timothy lied, surprising himself with how easily the deception came. I think we must assume she's either left the city or been captured. The falsehood created an uncomfortable weight in Timothy's chest, but he needed space to pursue his theory without interference. That night, as the household slept, he returned to the imperial scroll, focusing specifically on the Greek column. Certain phrases, certain constructions, they reminded him of something specific. Timothy retrieved Paul's personal writings from his pack, not the formal letters to churches, but his private reflections and notes. Placing them alongside the scroll, Timothy compared the writing styles meticulously. There were similarities, certainly. Both writers were educated, fluent in Greek philosophical concepts. But the differences were more striking. Paul's writing was direct, vigorous, shot through with Hebrew thought patterns even when writing in Greek. The scroll's author was more measured, more classically Greek in structure and reasoning. Not Paul, then. Timothy felt simultaneous relief and frustration. If not his mentor, then who possessed both the intimate knowledge of their movement and the literary education evident in the document? He expanded his investigation, comparing the scroll's style with letters and documents from other companions, Silas, Titus, various associates who had traveled with Paul over the years. None matched precisely, though several showed similar educational backgrounds. As dawn approached, Timothy realized he needed more evidence. The writing style alone wouldn't definitively identify the informant. He needed to cross-reference the scroll's contents with specific information that only certain individuals would have known. The next day, Timothy met Lydian as planned, sharing his inconclusive findings. She listened attentively, then offered an unexpected suggestion. You're approaching this as a scholar analyzing texts. Try thinking like an agent instead. Ask yourself, who benefits from specific revelations? Whose position is enhanced by particular pieces of information being known or unknown? It was a perspective Timothy hadn't considered, looking at the pattern of information rather than just its source. That would require mapping what was revealed against what was happening in our movement at specific times. Exactly, Lydian confirmed. Intelligence work isn't just about collecting information. It's about timing its release for maximum effect. With this new approach, Timothy returned to the documents, creating a timeline of revealed information against key decisions and movements within their community. A pattern began to emerge, one that pointed toward a specific purpose rather than mere information gathering. The informant appeared to be systematically undermining certain initiatives while promoting others. Specifically, efforts to incorporate Gentile believers with minimal Jewish requirements were being supported, while stricter approaches were being portrayed as potentially seditious to Rome. This pattern aligned with Paul's own teachings, but exaggerated to the point of caricature, as if someone were using Paul's genuine position to advance a more extreme agenda. Timothy shared these insights with Lydian the following day, meeting in the busy marketplace where their conversation would be masked by ambient noise. "You're describing someone who's using their position not just to inform, but to influence," Lydian observed. "That's concerning even from Rome's perspective. Agents who pursue personal agendas can be more dangerous than open enemies." "I'm narrowing the possibilities," Timothy explained. "Based on knowledge access and writing style, I've identified 3 potential candidates: Titus, Alexander the coppersmith, and," he hesitated before continuing, "Aristarchus." Lydian's expression revealed nothing. "The man you risked everything to rescue? That would be elegantly ironic. Which makes it either brilliant strategy or completely wrong," Timothy acknowledged. "I need more evidence before confronting anyone." "And you have limited time," Lydian reminded him. "Paul expects you in Macedonia within days." Timothy nodded grimly. "I need to speak with Aristarchus again, carefully. There's something about his capture and our rescue mission that doesn't align with the rest of the evidence." They parted ways, Timothy returning to Carpus's house with a strategy forming in his mind. He would create a controlled test, revealing specific information to Aristarchus that would have clear consequences if reported to Roman authorities. If imperial actions followed that could only result from that specific knowledge, he would have his answer. The opportunity came that evening, as Timothy and Aristarchus reviewed plans for their journey to Macedonia. "Paul mentioned a new believer in Philippi," Timothy said casually, introducing the fabricated information. "A former imperial treasurer who's offering financial support for our work in Rome." Aristarchus showed appropriate interest without suspicion. "That would be valuable. The community in Rome struggles with limited resources. Yes, though we'll need to be careful about how funds are transferred," Timothy continued, embellishing the fiction. "Paul suggested routing through Neapolis to avoid attention." The trap was set. If imperial officials suddenly showed interest in financial transfers through Neapolis, Timothy would know the source of the leak. Over the next 2 days, Timothy maintained normal activities while arranging with Lydian to monitor imperial communications about Neapolis. By the 3rd day, she brought news that confirmed his suspicions. Orders had been dispatched to customs officials at Neapolis to watch for unusual financial transactions. "It's Aristarchus," Timothy concluded heavily, the betrayal stinging despite his intellectual preparation. "What will you do?" Lydian asked. Timothy considered his options carefully. Confronting Aristarchus directly could be dangerous, not just physically, but for the broader mission if handled poorly. Yet leaving an active informant in their inner circle posed even greater risks. "I need to understand his motivations first," Timothy decided. "If he's been coerced or believes he's protecting the movement by controlling what information reaches Rome, there might be a way to address this without destroying him." That night, Timothy invited Aristarchus to join him on the rooftop of Carpus's house, ostensibly to discuss final travel preparations. Under the vast canopy of stars, Timothy steered the conversation toward broader questions of loyalty and compromise. "Do you ever wonder if Paul's approach is too accommodating to Roman authority?" Timothy asked, watching Aristarchus's reaction carefully. "What do you mean?" Aristarchus replied, instantly alert. His emphasis on respecting governing authorities, paying taxes, being model citizens. "Sometimes I wonder if we've compromised too much for safety's sake." Aristarchus's response was measured but revealing. "Paul understands that direct confrontation with Rome would destroy our movement before it can take root. Some might see that as compromise, but I see it as strategic wisdom." "But at what point does strategy become capitulation?" Timothy pressed. "When does working within a system make us complicit in its injustices?" "These are dangerous questions, Timothy," Aristarchus warned, tension evident in his posture. "Questions that could be misinterpreted if overheard by the wrong ears." "Like Roman ears," Timothy suggested quietly. A heavy silence fell between them. Aristarchus's expression shifted subtly, fear, calculation, and finally a resigned recognition. "How did you know?" he asked simply. "The imperial scroll," Timothy answered. "And patterns of information that could only have come from someone in our inner circle." Aristarchus didn't deny it. Instead, he looked out across the sleeping city, his profile sharp against the night sky. "How you don't understand the complexities of our position," he said finally. "None of you do, not even Paul for all his brilliance." "Then help me understand," Timothy urged. "Why betray people who trust you, people who share your professed faith?" "Betray," Aristarchus repeated the word with surprising heat. "Is that what you think I've done? I've been protecting this movement from its own naivety. Rome could crush us completely if they chose, and they would have, years ago, if not for people like me managing the relationship." The confession spilled out gradually, how Aristarchus had been recruited during Paul's first journey through Macedonia, how he had initially provided information reluctantly, but had grown to believe he was serving a greater purpose by controlling what Rome knew about their movement. "I highlight our similarities with approved philosophical schools, emphasize our moral teachings that support social stability, downplay elements that might seem politically threatening," he explained. "I've been building a case for Rome to tolerate us, perhaps even eventually recognize us." "At what cost?" Timothy challenged. "You've put companions at risk. You've compromised our integrity." "I've ensured our survival," Aristarchus countered. "Do you think Rome doesn't know exactly where Paul is at this moment? They could arrest him any time, but they don't, because I've convinced them he's more valuable as a moderating influence than as a martyr." Timothy struggled to process this perspective, so alien to his understanding of their mission, yet argued with evident sincerity. "And your capture, was that part of your strategy too?" Aristarchus looked away. "A miscalculation. My handler was replaced. The new one didn't appreciate the nuances of our arrangement. I was genuinely imprisoned, genuinely at risk." He turned, back to Timothy, his eyes intense in the starlight. "Your rescue was unexpected and meaningful to me. It's partly why I'm speaking openly now." The conversation continued deep into the night, Timothy pushing for complete honesty, while struggling to reconcile his anger at the betrayal with compassion for Aristarchus's complex motivations. By dawn, a fragile understanding had emerged. "What happens now?" Aristarchus asked as light began to bleed into the eastern sky. "Will you expose me to the others?" Timothy hadn't yet decided. "That depends on what you choose moving forward. Are you willing to end your arrangement with Rome?" "It's not that simple," Aristarchus protested. "If I stop reporting, they'll simply recruit someone else, someone who might not have the movement's interests at heart, as I do. Or they might respect our integrity when we refuse to be compromised," Timothy countered. The debate had no easy resolution. As they descended from the rooftop, Timothy made a provisional decision. "We proceed to Macedonia as planned. I won't expose you to the others yet, but I expect complete transparency from you going forward. No more selective reporting, no more manipulating information to serve your concept of the greater good." Aristarchus agreed, though Timothy sensed reservations beneath his acquiescence. One problem had been identified, but not truly resolved. Timothy met Lydian one final time before departing Troas, sharing the outcome of his confrontation with Aristarchus. She listened without judgment, then offered her perspective. "You've chosen a difficult path," she observed. "Neither full exposure nor simple acceptance. It reflects your position, always between worlds, always seeking integration rather than division." "Is that wisdom or indecision?" Timothy wondered aloud. "Perhaps that's for history to determine," Lydian replied. "But it's authentically your path, not Paul's, not Rome's, but a new way that honors multiple truths without surrendering to any single authority." As they prepared to part ways, Timothy asked the question that had lingered throughout their strange alliance. "What about you, Lydian? Where do your true loyalties lie?" Her smile held both warmth and mystery. "Like you, I serve something more complex than a single master. Coelius trained me well, perhaps too well. I've learned to see beyond immediate allegiances to longer patterns. Will I see you again?" "Our paths will cross when they need to," she answered enigmatically. She pressed something into his hand, a small silver seal similar to his grandmother's amulet, but bearing a different inscription. "For the journey ahead. Some doors are easier to open with the right symbol." Timothy recognized the insignia, a minor administrative seal that would grant certain privileges within Roman territories without carrying the full implications of official status. Another tool for navigating between worlds. As he turned to leave, Lydian offered one final observation. "You've been searching for resolution, Timothy, a way to reconcile your divided heritage. Perhaps you're beginning to see that the division itself is your strength. Not Greek or Jewish, not imperial or spiritual, but the unique perspective that comes from standing at the crossroads where these worlds meet." The insight resonated deeply. Timothy had spent his life trying to resolve the tension of his divided identity, but perhaps that tension itself was his unique contribution, the ability to see multiple perspectives, to translate between worldviews, to find paths of integrity through seemingly irreconcilable differences. As he rejoined Aristarchus and prepared for the journey to Macedonia, Timothy felt a new clarity emerging, not the simple resolution he had sought, but a more complex integration that honored all, the threads of his heritage while weaving them into something new. The journey to Macedonia unfolded without major incident. Timothy and Aristarchus traveled separately for security, reuniting at predetermined points along the route. Their conversations remained cautious, both men aware of the fragile trust between them. In Philippi, they found Paul teaching in the home of Lydia, a wealthy merchant woman who had been among the first converts in the region. The house bustled with activity, believers gathering for instruction, messengers arriving with news from other communities, scribes copying letters for distribution. Paul embraced Timothy warmly, his weathered face lighting with genuine affection. "I've been through much since we parted," he observed. "I see it in your eyes." That evening, after the gathered believers had dispersed, Timothy met privately with Paul, revealing everything: the imperial scroll, the identification of Aristarchus as the informant, the complex relationship with Lydian and Coelius. Paul listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful but unsurprised. "You knew," Timothy realized suddenly, "about Aristarchus, about Rome's interest in our movement. You knew all along." Paul sighed, the sound carrying the weight of years. "I suspected. There have always been those who believe they serve our message best by managing its relationship with power. Aristarchus is not the first, nor will he be the last." "And you allowed it?" Timothy couldn't hide his shock. "Her who not allowed, acknowledged its inevitability," Paul clarified. "When a movement grows beyond its founder's direct oversight, different perspectives emerge. Some, like Aristarchus, believe compromise with temporal powers serves the eternal message. Others insist on purity at any cost. My role has been to maintain the essential truth amidst these competing visions." Timothy struggled to reconcile this pragmatic approach with the uncompromising faith he had witnessed in Paul. "But the integrity of our message, doesn't it suffer when we accommodate power?" "That depends," Paul replied, "on whether the accommodation touches the core truth or merely its temporal expression. Rome cares about stability, loyalty, public order. Our message addresses the human heart, the relationship between creature and creator. the transformation of character. These need not conflict if properly understood. Aristarchus went beyond understanding. He actively shaped how Rome perceives us, Timothy pointed out. Yes, and therein lies his error, Paul acknowledged, not in recognizing Rome's concerns, but in adjusting our message to suit them. The boundary is subtle but critical. They talked deep into the night, exploring nuances of leadership that Timothy had never considered. Paul shared his own journey, how his initial zeal had been tempered by experience, how he had learned to distinguish between essential truths worth dying for and peripheral matters where flexibility served the greater mission. The path before you is more complex than the one I walked, Paul concluded. You bridge worlds in ways I never could, Greek and Jewish, philosophical and spiritual, imperial and prophetic. That's why you faced these tests of discernment so directly. Tests? Timothy questioned. The revelation about your father, the imperial scroll, Aristarchus's betrayal, Lydian's ambiguous loyalty, Paul enumerated. Each forced you to examine the spaces between worlds to find integrity where others see only compromise. Timothy considered this perspective. What should I do about Aristarchus? What do you believe is right? Paul returned the question. I don't know, Timothy admitted. Exposing him publicly could damage the movement's unity. Allowing him to continue as before feels like condoning deception. There must be another way. Paul nodded approvingly. Perhaps there is. Consider this. Aristarchus believes he serves our cause by controlling what Rome knows about us. What if, instead, he helped us understand Rome's concerns while we maintain the integrity of our message? You mean, use his connections openly? Transform his role from secret informant to acknowledged liaison? It would require extraordinary humility on his part, Paul acknowledged, and forgiveness on ours. But it might transform a weakness into a strength. The suggestion was radical yet compelling, typical of Paul's approach to seemingly irreconcilable conflicts. Rather than choosing between stark alternatives, he envisioned a third path that transcended the original opposition. The next morning, Timothy approached Aristarchus with this proposition. The man's initial reaction was defensive disbelief. You want me to confess to being an informant? To publicly admit betrayal? Aristarchus demanded. Not to everyone, Timothy clarified. Initially just to the core leadership, and not as a confession of betrayal, but as an acknowledgement of a misguided attempt to protect our movement. They'll never trust me again, Aristarchus protested. Perhaps not as before, Timothy conceded. But authentic trust isn't based on ignorance. It's founded on truth, however difficult. Aristarchus struggled visibly with the proposal. And what would my role be, exactly? To help us understand how our message is perceived by those in power. To identify potential misunderstandings before they escalate to persecution. But not to shape our message to suit power's preferences. That boundary must be clear. The conversation was difficult, with resistance and backsliding. By its end, however, Aristarchus had reluctantly agreed to meet with Paul and several other leaders to discuss his past actions and potential future role. That meeting, tense, emotional, at times heated, became a turning point for Timothy. Not because it resolved all conflicts or healed all breaches of trust, but because it demonstrated the possibility of finding integrity amidst complexity. No one left fully satisfied. Aristarchus felt exposed and vulnerable. Some leaders remained skeptical of his reformation, yet a path forward had been forged that neither ignored betrayal nor foreclosed redemption. In the days that followed, Timothy found himself increasingly called upon to mediate similar tensions within the growing movement. Questions of Jewish practices among Gentile believers, relationships with local authorities, distribution of resources, all required the ability to see multiple perspectives without losing sight of core principles. Paul observed this emerging leadership with evident satisfaction. One evening, as they walked along the river where the Philippian believers gathered for prayer, he shared his vision for Timothy's future. You will face challenges I never encountered, Paul said, his voice reflective. As our message spreads, it encounters different cultures, different political realities, different philosophical frameworks. It must remain essentially true while speaking meaningfully to this diversity. How? Timothy asked. How do we maintain integrity across such differences? By distinguishing between the living heart of our message and its cultural expressions, Paul replied. By recognizing that truth remains truth even when it speaks with different accents. Paul stopped walking, turning to face Timothy directly. This is why your particular journey has been necessary, Timothy. Your life has prepared you to stand at these intersections, to translate between worlds without being captured by any single perspective. The weight of this calling settled on Timothy, both burden and privilege. He thought of his divided childhood, his father's complex legacy, his journey with Paul, his encounters with figures like Coelius and Lydian. Each had shaped his understanding of how to maintain integrity while navigating between seemingly opposed worlds. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Timothy confessed. Paul's smile held both compassion and certainty. "No one ever is. Leadership isn't granted to the fully prepared, but to those willing to grow into its challenges." In the weeks that followed, this growth accelerated. Paul began delegating more significant responsibilities, having Timothy teach established communities, compose portions of letters, make decisions about resource allocation. With each new task, Timothy felt both the weight of responsibility and the growing confidence that came from Paul's trust. The relationship with Aristarchus evolved cautiously. His knowledge of imperial perspectives proved valuable, helping the movement avoid unnecessary provocations while maintaining essential principles. Trust rebuilt slowly, differently than before, based not on assumed alignment, but on transparent communication of different perspectives. Word reached them that Lydian had been reassigned to duties in Rome itself. Through discreet channels, she conveyed that Coelius remained interested in Timothy's development, seeing in him a potential bridge between imperial stability and the moral renewal that the movement of believers might offer a troubled empire. "He still hopes to recruit you more directly," her message concluded, "but he also respects the integrity of your chosen path." Timothy found himself strangely touched by this acknowledgement from a man he had never met. His father's mentor and a dedicated servant of a system Timothy could neither fully embrace nor entirely reject. One night, unable to sleep, Timothy climbed to the roof of their lodging in Philippi. The stars above seemed both familiar and new, the same patterns he had observed as a boy in Lystra, yet viewed now through eyes shaped by his journey. He held his grandmother's amulet in one hand, Lydian's imperial seal in the other, symbols of the different worlds he stood between. "Not division," he murmured to the night sky, "but integration." In that moment of quiet revelation, Timothy felt a new clarity about his path forward. He would never fully belong to any single world, not Jewish nor Greek, not imperial nor countercultural, not philosophical nor spiritual. His unique contribution lay precisely in this liminality, the ability to stand at intersections, to build bridges, to translate between worldviews without surrendering the essential truth that animated his life. This wasn't compromise, but a more complex fidelity, not to single perspectives, but to the larger truth that transcended and integrated them. Not an easier path, certainly, but one uniquely his to walk. A year passed. Timothy traveled extensively with Paul, strengthening established communities of believers and helping to establish new ones. The pattern established in Philippi continued, Paul increasingly delegating leadership responsibilities, Timothy growing into his role as a bridge between diverse expressions of their shared faith. In Ephesus, where they returned for an extended teaching mission, Timothy received an unexpected package. The delivery came through unusual channels, neither the regular messenger network used by believers nor official imperial couriers, but a private commercial service that specialized in discretion. Inside the small sealed container, Timothy found two items, a letter bearing Coelius's distinctive seal and a second scroll that appeared ancient, its parchment yellowed and edges crumbling. The letter was brief and direct. "Your father entrusted this to me before his final journey to Lystra. He asked that I give it to you when you were ready to understand its implications." Recent events suggest that time has come. What you do with this knowledge remains, as always, your choice. C. With hands that trembled slightly, Timothy unrolled the ancient scroll. It contained genealogical records, family lines traced through generations, written in an archaic form of Hebrew with Greek annotations added later. At first, the significance eluded him. Then a particular name caught his eye, his father's original Roman name, connected through a series of marriages and adoptions to a Jewish family line that traced back to the tribe of Levi. Timothy sat, motionless, absorbing the implications. His father, the Greek merchant who had raised him, who had later been revealed as a Roman agent, had himself carried Jewish heritage. The man who had opposed Timothy's spiritual journey had himself descended from the priestly tribe of Israel. This revelation transformed Timothy's understanding of his father's complex identity. The man had lived divided in ways Timothy hadn't imagined, Greek by education, Roman by allegiance, Jewish by distant ancestry. No wonder he had struggled with Timothy's religious choices. They echoed his own unresolved tensions. Timothy took the scroll to Paul, who studied it with scholarly attention. "This appears authentic," he concluded. "Such records were carefully preserved, especially among families with priestly connections. Why would my father keep this hidden?" Timothy wondered. "Why not share this part of his heritage?" The time when he established his identity in Lystra was dangerous for those with Jewish connections, Paul suggested. Perhaps he buried this aspect of himself so deeply that acknowledging it to you became impossible. The genealogical record added yet another layer to Timothy's already complex heritage, not just Greek and Jewish through his mother, but carrying Jewish lineage through his father as well, albeit distant and disconnected from living practice. "It changes nothing practically," Timothy said, "yet it changes everything in my understanding." "Such is often the nature of revelation," Paul observed. "It doesn't alter the facts of our lives, but transforms their meaning." In the days that followed, Timothy composed a response to Coelius, thanking him for sharing this knowledge. The process of writing to his father's mentor proved unexpectedly cathartic, an opportunity to articulate his evolving understanding of identity and purpose. "I once sought resolution to the divisions within my heritage," he wrote. "Now I recognize that standing between worlds is not a temporary condition to be resolved, but a permanent position from which to serve. My father never found peace in his divided identity. Perhaps his greatest gift to me was creating the conditions that would allow me to find integration where he experienced only conflict." Sending this letter through the same discreet commercial service, Timothy felt a sense of completing a circle, acknowledging his connection to Coelius without compromising his primary commitments. Meanwhile, the work in Ephesus intensified. The community of believers had grown significantly since their last visit, creating new challenges of organization and leadership. Paul, increasingly limited by physical ailments that plagued his aging body, relied heavily on Timothy to address practical matters. "You're becoming the leader they look to," Paul noted after a particularly challenging meeting where Timothy had successfully mediated between factions with different understandings of their shared faith. "Only because they know I represent you," Timothy demurred. Paul shook his head. "No, because they recognize in you something essential, the ability to honor different perspectives while maintaining focus on central truths. That's a rare gift, Timothy, and an increasingly necessary one as our movement grows beyond its original context." The observation both encouraged and sobered Timothy. He could see the movement's trajectory, expanding beyond its Jewish roots, engaging with diverse cultures and political realities, facing questions its founders hadn't anticipated. Leading in such a context would require precisely the capacity he had been developing to stand between worlds without being captured by any single perspective. This understanding was tested when Paul announced his intention to return to Jerusalem, a journey fraught with danger, given growing tensions between Jewish authorities and followers of the Way. "It's unnecessary," Timothy argued. "Your letters can convey the same messages without putting yourself at risk." "Some things require presence, not just words," Paul replied firmly. The unity of our movement, embracing both Jewish and Gentile expressions of faith, must be physically embodied, not just theoretically asserted. The principle resonated with Timothy's own developing philosophy, though he remained concerned about the practical dangers. "Then I'll accompany you," he decided. Paul's response surprised him. "No. You're needed here in Ephesus. The community faces both internal tensions and external pressures. Your particular gifts are essential to navigating these challenges." "You're asking me to remain behind while you face danger alone?" Timothy protested. "I'm asking you to lead, where you're needed most," Paul corrected gently. "I won't be alone, others will travel with me, but no one else can do what you're being called to do here." This separation marked a significant transition. For years, Timothy had worked alongside Paul, drawing strength and guidance from his mentor's presence. Now he was being asked to stand alone, to lead independently while Paul pursued a different aspect of their shared mission. Before departing, Paul composed a detailed letter of instruction and encouragement for Timothy, guidance for the challenging role he was assuming. The letter addressed practical matters of community organization, theological questions likely to arise, and personal counsel about maintaining spiritual vitality amidst leadership pressures. "Guard what has been entrusted to your care," Paul wrote in conclusion. "Your position between worlds is not a weakness to be resolved, but a gift to be stewarded. Few can see multiple perspectives without losing sight of essential truth. This capacity will be increasingly vital as our movement encounters new cultures and contexts." The farewell was emotional for both men. Paul, never demonstrative, embraced Timothy with unusual warmth. "We may not meet again in this life," he said quietly, "but our work continues in different forms, in different places, part of the same, larger purpose." Timothy watched Paul's departing ship with mixed emotions, grief at the separation, anxiety about Paul's safety in Jerusalem, and a nervous awareness of the responsibilities now resting solely on his shoulders. In the months that followed, Timothy grew into this independent leadership role. He mediated disputes between Jewish and Gentile believers, addressed questions about appropriate engagement with local authorities, and maintained communication with other communities through an expanding network of letters and messengers. Word eventually reached Ephesus that Paul had indeed been arrested in Jerusalem and transferred to Rome for trial. The news brought both concern for Paul's well-being and practical challenges for communities that had relied on his apostolic authority. Timothy responded by intensifying his own letter-writing ministry, composing carefully considered guidance to communities facing similar challenges across Asia Minor and Greece. In these letters, he developed a distinctive voice that honored Paul's foundational teachings while addressing new questions with his own integrative perspective. "Our message must remain essentially the same, while speaking meaningfully to diverse contexts," he wrote to believers in Colossae who faced pressure to incorporate local philosophical concepts. This requires discernment about what constitutes its living heart versus its cultural expressions. We neither reject all accommodation nor accept all innovation, but test each according to core principles. This approach, neither rigid fundamentalism nor uncritical adaptation, reflected Timothy's unique position between worlds. He could appreciate both the importance of maintaining connection to founding traditions and the necessity of meaningful engagement with new cultural contexts. As his leadership developed, Timothy maintained discreet communication with unexpected allies. Aristarchus, now openly acknowledged as a connection to imperial perspectives, provided valuable insights that helped believers navigate political complexities without unnecessary provocation. Lydian, writing from Rome, shared information about Paul's condition and the changing imperial attitudes toward religious movements. Most surprising was a brief message from Coelius himself, delivered through his commercial channels. "Your approach interests those who value both stability and moral renewal. Continue building bridges rather than walls. Some forms of transformation occur not through confrontation, but through integration." Timothy recognized both the encouragement and the subtle recruitment in these words. Coelius still hoped to draw him into more direct collaboration with imperial interests. Yet the acknowledgement of his integrative approach from such a source confirmed Timothy's growing conviction that his divided heritage had prepared him for a unique role. One evening, after a particularly challenging day addressing conflicts within the Ephesian community, Timothy retreated to the rooftop of his lodging. The stars above reminded him of similar nights in Lystra, in Troas, in Philippi, constants in a journey of continuous change. He held the two symbols that had accompanied this journey, his grandmother's Hebrew amulet and Lydian's imperial seal. No longer representing competing loyalties, they now symbolized the multiple perspectives he had learned to integrate. Different vantage points from which to perceive a larger truth that transcended any single viewpoint. In that moment of quiet reflection, Timothy felt a depth of peace he had not known before. Not because all questions were answered or all tensions resolved, but because he had found a way to live faithfully amidst complexity, maintaining integrity not through simplistic choices, but through discerning integration. The path ahead remained challenging. Paul's extended imprisonment in Rome created leadership vacuums in communities across the empire. Opposition from both religious traditionalists and political authorities continued to threaten the movement's expansion. New philosophical currents raised questions about how their message should engage with diverse cultural frameworks. Yet, Timothy faced these challenges with a growing confidence, not in his own abilities, but in the integrative perspective his journey had developed. Standing between worlds had become not a temporary condition to be resolved, but his distinctive contribution to a movement navigating complex cultural and political landscapes. 5 years passed. The movement of believers continued to spread across the empire, adapting to diverse cultural contexts while maintaining its essential message. Timothy's leadership role expanded correspondingly, his letters providing guidance to communities facing increasingly complex questions of faith and practice. News eventually reached Ephesus of Paul's execution in Rome, not unexpected given the political climate, yet devastating nonetheless. Timothy observed the formal mourning rituals with the community, while privately processing the more personal grief of losing his mentor and spiritual father. In the solitude of his quarters, Timothy unrolled Paul's final letter, sent months before his death. The parchment had worn thin from repeated reading, the words familiar yet continually revealing new depths. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me but also to all who have longed for his appearing. These words had sustained Timothy through the initial shock of Paul's death. Now they spoke to him of inheritance, not just the spiritual inheritance Paul referenced, but the inheritance of leadership, of perspective, of purpose that Timothy had received through their years together. This sense of inheritance was reinforced when an unexpected visitor arrived in Ephesus, Lydian no longer in the simple traveling clothes Timothy remembered, but dressed as a woman of means and position. Their meeting, arranged discreetly to avoid unwanted attention, carried both the warmth of shared history and the caution of continued complexity. Coelius is dying, Lydian informed him after initial greetings. He asked me to bring you this. She handed Timothy a sealed document bearing the distinctive mark of his father's mentor. Breaking the seal, Timothy found both a personal letter and official records pertaining to his father's service to Rome, the complete account of his recruitment, activities, and eventual request to be released from his obligations. Your father's final communication with me concerned you, Coelius had written in trembling script that revealed his declining health. He feared the division he experienced would be your inheritance as well. I believe he would be gratified to know that what was fragmentation for him has become integration for you. The official records revealed dimensions of his father's life that Timothy had never known. How the Greek merchant identity had begun as a cover but gradually became genuine. How his father had increasingly provided information that protected vulnerable communities rather than endangered them. How his final years had been marked by growing disillusionment with imperial priorities. Most significantly, the records confirmed what Timothy had long suspected. His father had ultimately been executed not by random bandits, as officially reported, but by imperial agents who deemed him unreliable. His growing sympathy for the very communities he was supposed to monitor had made him a liability. "He died protecting certain believers in Lystra," Lydian explained softly, seeing Timothy's reaction to this revelation. "Including your mother and grandmother. His final act was to warn them of planned arrests." The knowledge transformed Timothy's understanding of his father, a man more complex and ultimately more courageous than he had ever realized. Not a hero in any simple sense, but someone who had found his way to a kind of integrity despite the divisions that plagued his life. "And Coelius shared this with you?" Timothy asked, studying Lydian with new curiosity. "He trusted you with this knowledge?" "I've been his protégé since my father's execution," Lydian replied. "Much as you were Paul's, we both inherited complex legacies." The parallel struck Timothy forcefully. He and Lydian had walked similar paths from opposite starting points, both navigating between competing loyalties, both seeking integration where others saw only division. "What happens now?" Timothy asked. "With Coelius gone, what becomes of his interest in our movement?" "That depends partly on you," Lydian answered. "Coelius built a network of officials who share his perspective that moral and spiritual renewal is necessary for the Empire's long-term stability. Some see your movement as potentially contributing to that renewal if properly understood and engaged." "By properly understood and engaged, you mean controlled," Timothy translated. Lydian's smile acknowledged the accuracy of his interpretation. "Control is Rome's instinct, but Coelius came to believe that some transformations cannot be controlled, only channeled. His final instruction to his network was to maintain connection with you specifically, as someone who understands both sides of this complex relationship." This revelation positioned Timothy at yet another intersection of competing worlds, now not just as a leader within the movement of believers, but as a potential bridge to elements within the imperial system itself. In the days that followed, Timothy reflected deeply on this expanded understanding of his role. The inheritance he had received was multifaceted: Paul's spiritual mentorship, his father's complex legacy, and now Coelius's recognition of his unique integrative capacity. This integration was tested immediately in the Ephesian community, which faced growing internal tensions as it expanded. Jewish believers emphasized continuity with scriptural traditions, while Gentile converts brought philosophical frameworks from their Greek education. Wealthy members and those of humble origins brought different perspectives on material possessions and social organization. Former pagans and those raised in monotheistic traditions understood spiritual concepts through different lenses. Timothy addressed these tensions not by choosing sides, but by helping each group appreciate the legitimate insights of others. His letters to other communities reflected this same approach, honoring diverse cultural expressions of faith while maintaining focus on essential principles. "We need not all speak with the same accent," he wrote to believers in Corinth who faced similar challenges, "but we must speak of the same reality. Unity doesn't require uniformity. It flourishes in the rich soil of mutual respect and shared core commitments." This philosophy, integration without homogenization, became Timothy's distinctive contribution to the growing movement. Where Paul had provided the theological foundation and apostolic authority, Timothy offered a model for navigating cultural and contextual diversity without losing essential integrity. This approach extended to relationships with external authorities as well. Timothy neither sought confrontation with imperial powers nor accepted uncritical accommodation. Instead, he developed nuanced guidelines for believers: honor governing authorities in matters of civil order, pay taxes, observe public peace, contribute to community welfare, but reserve ultimate loyalty for transcendent truth. Where human commands contradict divine principles, our choice is clear, though we accept the consequences with dignity rather than rebellion. This balanced stance, neither revolutionary nor subservient, reflected Timothy's recognition that their movement existed within political realities it could neither ignore nor simply accept. His guidance helped communities navigate this complexity without unnecessary conflict or unprincipled compromise. As Timothy's influence grew, he maintained the practice of writing letters, both to communities under his direct spiritual care and to other leaders facing similar challenges. These letters, composed with careful attention to both theological precision and practical application, became his primary legacy to the expanding movement. In a particularly significant letter to younger leaders he had mentored, Timothy articulated the philosophy that had emerged from his journey. Leadership in our times requires the capacity to stand between worlds, honoring tradition while engaging new contexts, respecting authorities while maintaining spiritual integrity, affirming unity while celebrating diversity. This is not compromise but a more complex fidelity, seeing from multiple perspectives without losing sight of essential truth. My own journey began with the tension of divided heritage, Greek and Jewish, reason and faith, imperial and prophetic. What once seemed a burden to be resolved has revealed itself as a gift to be stewarded. Perhaps this is true for you as well. Your own unique positioning, culturally, intellectually, spiritually, may be precisely what enables you to serve as a bridge where others see only walls. This insight, that apparent division could become the foundation for unique contribution, became the cornerstone of Timothy's approach to leadership development. He sought out individuals who stood at similar intersections of competing worlds, recognizing in their divided experiences not confusion to be resolved, but potential to be developed. Years passed. Timothy's hair silvered prematurely, his health sometimes fragile from years of travel and constant responsibility. Yet his spiritual vigor and intellectual engagement remained undiminished. The network of communities under his guidance expanded throughout Asia Minor and beyond, each maintaining connection to founding principles while developing distinctive expressions appropriate to their cultural contexts. Timothy's relationship with Lydian evolved into an unusual alliance. Though never formally part of the community of believers, she maintained regular correspondence, sharing perspectives from imperial circles while receiving Timothy's insights about spiritual and moral questions. This exchange benefited both, Timothy gaining broader understanding of political dynamics affecting their movement, Lydian receiving a perspective that transcended mere pragmatism. On the 20th anniversary of Paul's death, Timothy made a pilgrimage to Rome. The journey was physically taxing but spiritually significant, an opportunity to honor his mentor's legacy while witnessing the flourishing community of believers in the imperial capital. While in Rome, Timothy received an unexpected invitation to meet with a small group of imperial officials, part of the network Chelius had established years before. Though cautious, Timothy accepted, recognizing an opportunity to promote understanding that might benefit vulnerable communities throughout the empire.